It is 5:31. I think we might still be waiting on a couple of commissioners here. We do have a quorum currently, but perhaps wait a couple more minutes to see if the other commissioners show up. Tamara or Basilia, I'm not sure if you have a feel for who's all coming commissioner-wise to the meeting or not.
My understanding is that everybody should be coming.
Okay, great, thanks.
To the commissioners that are here, it's your option whether or not to turn on your video cameras. If you're willing to turn them on, I would be grateful to be able to see you. And I will do the same.
Is that Santa Claus?
Scott does look like Santa Claus.
It's time for a trim then.
When all white. You can't hide that. Wow. Congratulations.
Okay, I see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think all of us are here who are currently on the commission, so I am ready to call the meeting to order. Can we have the roll call, please?
Ricardo Diaz.
Here.
Scott Dossett.
Here.
Mikhail Lubinsky.
Here.
Megan McGinty.
Here.
Patrice Pelmore.
Here.
Daryl Price.
Here.
Darius White.
Darius has resigned his position on the commission.
We do have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Before we move to an approval of the agenda, there's a request from the city to add an item. Can I get a motion to add an item to the agenda to discuss the board member orientation requirement?
So moved.
Is there a second? Thank you.
I second.
Okay. We need a motion to approve the agenda.
Made.
Seconded.
And I think we have to do everything with a roll call. We can't just do it through ayes. So do we need a roll call?
Ricardo Diaz.
Yay.
Scott Dossett.
Yahoo.
Mikhail Lubinsky.
Yes.
Megan McGinty.
Yay.
Patrice Pelmore.
I believe I have to abstain because I haven't had the orientation yet.
Okay.
That's a good reason.
Daryl Price.
Yay.
Okay, so the agenda has been approved, and we now move to public participation. Two quick comments before we begin public participation. I was asked to let the attendees know that the city council members and the mayor are following this meeting, but according to the Open Meetings Act, they cannot be in the Zoom meeting as participants, since that would be a violation of the act. So I was asked to let everyone know that they are following on UPTV, so we should just know that that's happening. In regard to one other introductory comment in regard to public participation, the instructions in the posted agenda were, I think, less accurate to the ordinance than we want them to be. So I'm just going to read out loud very quickly the how we're going to do public comment, and then we'll go ahead and get started with that. Public comment is limited to no more than 5 minutes per person and no more than 2 hours per meeting, unless extended by consent of a majority vote of the members present. If the presiding officer recognizes that more than 20 persons desire to speak, including comments sent via email, the presiding officer may limit each speaker to comments of no more than 3 minutes. I see that there are fewer than 20 people on the call, and there is only one email comment. So I don't think we will reach 20. So we can set the clock at 5 minutes. So if anybody wants to make public comment, raise your hand, and yep. And Jason, you will call in people, or am I calling in people? And yeah, I will call in people, and I guess Jason will unmute them. I guess just one more quick word as we get started. As you can see, my name is Mikhail. I'm the chair of the CPRB. I am the new chair. This is my first meeting that I'm chairing. So please be patient with me as I familiarize myself with the parliamentary procedure, and we will do the best we can. So let's start with Bijal Patel.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
I can hear you.
All right. So hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Bijal Patel. So I'm a resident of Urbana for the past 4 years. I'm a grad student at the university. So as I said, I'm a resident of Urbana, and actually I'm part of an informal group of sort of concerned residents. The group's sort of tentatively called Stop Police Violence CU. And so what I'd like to do right now is talk about what a subgroup of us have been working on in terms of a list of recommendations for the CPRB. So a small group of us have been taking a look at the Urbana CPRB specifically, and also literature on CPRBs more generally, and have put together a list of recommendations to help inform the discussion as you all are working on, sort of reforming the system. So I think all of the members should have access to that at this point from email. If not, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll send you a copy. For any members of the public who are listening and haven't seen the list of recommendations, I've put it up in petition form on change.org. If you just search for Urbana Civilian Police Review Board and then put CPRB, you'll be able to find it and read the entire text. I'm just mentioning that because basically we spent a few weeks and we just try to come up with a very large list of, a comprehensive list of recommendations here. So if for anyone else thinking about ways to improve, it might save you some time and might give you some ideas to think about. Okay, so for the remainder of my comment, I want to just briefly try to hit the highlights of this petition. And so I'm happy to note that the agenda for today does cover some of the items already, and I think that's great. And so I hope that you'll forgive any repetition that I'm going to go through and just consider that as support for the same items that you already are considering. So I don't think this will take the whole 3 minutes, but let me just get started and talk about some of the things that we considered in writing this petition. So basically the first thing is I want to point out that, okay, so we all recognize that, civilian oversight of police is a critical piece of effective public safety policy. It's great that we have a civilian police review board. It makes sense, why they sort of instituted this about a decade ago. But there's some issues right now which are which I'm sure you're all aware of, which are preventing you from really effectively performing oversight. And so some of these issues are ordinance-based. Basically, there's language in the ordinance that sort of hobbles the review board and prevents you from taking effective action. But a lot of them are also sort of either policy-based or sort of action-based. And so these are things that basically, depend on city employees providing information or basically on the board members themselves kind of taking action on. And so in the petition itself, we've put together a list of kind of some things that we think would help. So for example, failing to meet quarterly and instead meeting more frequently than that is already something on the agenda item. So things like that. What specifically I'd like to do now is just focus on some of the major recommendations. So one of the clear problems that we've seen with the CPRB process is that access to the CPRB has been pretty severely limited. So even before the CPRB starts to consider any appeals or complaints, getting a complaint to the CPRB is fairly difficult. And so to address that, let's see. one of the things that we'd like to look at is basically removing some of the administrative and structural barriers to filing complaints. And so some of these things are policy changes that you can make immediately, as in they're not covered by the ordinance, or just decisions that are on the form. Others will require ordinance language changes. And so just a few of the recommendations we have on this are, first of all, time limits for submitting complaints should be eliminated. Right now, the city is sort of abusing the time limits policy. Basically, what I mean by that is, in one specific case, the city sort of waited to provide FOIA information to the complainant, and then after the information was provided, they rejected the complaint for being filed too late, even though sort of, it was based on the city itself, sort of waiting. So time limits in this case seem to really just be a kind of unnecessary barrier. Furthermore, the notary requirement, as you all have noted, is fairly unnecessary. Both Champaign and Chicago don't require notarization of complaints, so we can get rid of that in a pretty straightforward way. Let me see. So just some other highlights from this. I think it'd be important to look at what is the sort of requirement of a first-hand witness. And the ordinance is left somewhat unclear, and it has been interpreted very strictly. So basically, if you see a video that suggests that there's misconduct, as of right now, your misconduct will be, or your complaint will be rejected. So some of the other major things that we're proposing. First, complaints to the Cprv should be tracked publicly, and ultimately it should be up to the board to decide whether they're accepted or rejected. So we'd like to remove gatekeeping from the city and from the Urbana Police Department before it reaches you all. And then finally, there's some other recommendations here that are specific to basically making the Cprv more publicly accountable. Basically, it'd be very useful to have all of the information that you all consider either come out in a public report at the end, or in some other way, sort of increase engagement. Because right now, it seems like the citizens or the residents of Urbana don't really trust the system, and that's leading to a lot of people just avoiding the complaint process entirely. And I'm sure you all have joined the board for a reason, right? You want to be helpful to this. So I hope you can look at these suggestions and use them basically as a starting point.
Thank you, Pachal. I will not make comment after every statement, but I do want to say that we've received the petition, and my intention is to get the city to post it on the city website for easy access for everyone. And my second intention is to create space, not in this meeting since it already has an agenda, but in a future meeting for a more in-depth discussion with this group that created the petition, as well as other groups that are clearly have a stake in the ways that our community is policed. So thank you for that. Let's move to Emily Close.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, board members. I'd like to make a few comments. First of all, regarding today's list of new business items. Under 5B, where it says discontinue requiring police complaints to be notarized, where in the ordinance does it require that complaints be notarized? This is silly. Seems like the city is just trying to validate and overlook Vasilia Clark's egregious habit of improperly rejecting complaints that haven't been notarized. Under 5C, where it says add an administrative step to the police complaint process, what is the administrative step? And why isn't it spelled out clearly so we can make comments about it before you, the board, discuss it as new business? Your record of providing self-oversight is poor. If any of you had been on the ball, not asleep at the wheel, the board might be functioning with more accountability and transparency. I hope going forward you not only show up for meetings, but do so on time. Read the ordinance and know what your role is. Understand that producing reports is a requirement of the ordinance, not something you get to ignore. And please stop allowing city staff who are supposed to be supporting your efforts get away with not providing you with the complaints. This is an outrageous violation of the public trust. And finally, at the October 23rd, 2019 meeting that I attended in person, Preston James said that only 2 complaints had been appealed since the start of the Cprv. I know the 3rd complaint was heard on January 29th of this year. Where is this magical 4th complaint coming from? Please provide a list of the appeal dates of these 3 or 4 complaints and their outcomes, and any other information such as a description of the original complaint. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Jane, and then Christopher.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Faintly, Jane. If you a little louder would be great.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now, thank you.
Okay, my name's Jane McClintock, and I'm a resident of East Urbana. I agree with what everyone has said and support the petition that Bajal has described. But I wanted to speak specifically, since they've spoken well to that and outlined the requests well in the petition. I wanted to speak to my personal experience of trying to make a complaint recently, just as an example of the need to reduce greatly the institutional barriers to creating a complaint. First, I wanted to create a complaint, and so I went to the website to download the form and realized that I couldn't download the form, and that in fact I needed to email Vasilia to ask her for the form. At which point it took several days, but I did get the form. Thank you, Vasilia. I think this is something that could very easily be corrected. And then when I went to appeal the decision, I also had to request that form and be provided it by Carol Mitten, which took some time and seemed totally unnecessary. Furthermore, I'm somebody that, honestly, I've been blessed with a wonderful education in the Urbana Public Schools at an Ivy League university and have a master's degree, which I wouldn't usually point to, except for the fact that I had to rewrite my complaint because it was grammatically not clear enough and not legal enough to be even considered by the police department. I did correct it, and they were willing to look at it. But I think that this is a really ridiculous level of pickiness. I think that the intention was clear, and to have to write it in some kind of legal fashion is really unreasonable. Furthermore, this interpretation of a firsthand account as not including video evidence, I think is preposterous. And if it really must be interpreted that way, you should endeavor to change it immediately, because as we have seen across the country, video evidence is really critical to having any kind of oversight of the police department. People who are traumatized by police violence are not the ones who should have to go through the process of filing the complaint every time. And furthermore, the legal definition of a firsthand account is that it's not hearsay. If none of us have any question or concern about the validity of the video evidence, which I think in many cases is definitely the case, there's no reason to reject that evidence as basis for a complaint. Furthermore, I think it's very silly that you guys can't decide what police conduct you would like to investigate, regardless of which citizens want to complain about it. And so I guess I just, there's much more that I feel I could say about this, and I just want to express my appreciation for you guys taking a look at this, and I hope you take seriously the petition and look creatively at how you can better have oversight of the police, from where you're sitting. So thank you for the work that you've done and for the work you're going to do going forward. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jane. Christopher, followed by Tracy Chung.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Christopher Hansen. I've been a resident of Urbana for the past 8 years. I agree with the changes recommended in the petition that was described earlier by Mr. Patel. And I think a lot has been said so far, so I don't want to belabor any of those points, but I'm going to try to comment on some specific agenda items today. And the first thing that popped out at me was the notary requirement, and I agree with what the previous speaker said. And my question is, what legal tool is going to be used to discontinue the notary requirement? Because it's not actually a requirement listed in the ordinance to begin with. And I think it's important that the board, I know it's silly to be discussing this notary requirement when we should be talking about like deadly use of force, but the fact that we can't even get agreement from the city staff on this one is notable. And what we need to understand, and the discussion that I think needs to take place is, how is it possible, through what mechanism can it be possible that city staff can kind of invent these new barriers and just kind of invoke whatever extra rules they want to invent? And along those lines, what mechanism is the CPRB, the board members, going to use to remove that barrier? Because it's a currently invented one. And I think it's notable that that right now, our city administrator Carol Mitten and our human relations officer Cecilia Clark, our city attorney James Simon, have all basically agreed that this notary requirement seems to implicitly exist in the CPRB ordinance, even though it just simply isn't there. And I want to kind of remind you guys, if you're discussing the notary requirement today, I know there was some argument made by the city attorney and Carol Mitten and probably from Urbana police officers about, wanting to make sure that it's a sworn affidavit and that they know the identity of the complainant. I want to remind the board that the Urbana Police Department, I've actually asked a lieutenant about this. The Urbana Police Department is entirely happy to accept complaints about extreme misconduct, such as robbery, rape, and murder, but only if those complaints are made against civilians. As soon as you're trying to complain against a police officer, all of a sudden there's these, extra barriers introduced. So you can call Crime Stoppers right now and report, the most extreme, situation of, a shooting, a murder, or whatever, and you can do that anonymously, and the Urbana police will, go investigate that maybe too enthusiastically. So, but why is it the case that the Urbana police are perfectly fine with anonymous information, only up to the point where it's made about anyone but a police officer? It just seems like it's another reminder of one of those extreme exceptions that we have for police officers, and it doesn't make any sense. And I also want to point out that, besides this notary requirement issue, I've seen many letters now from, Cecilia Clark, Carol Mitten, and James Simon, where they're just inventing new barriers to deny complaints for reasons that just aren't listed in the ordinance. And they're doing this because they don't want those complaints to actually get to the board members, because I think city staff don't actually want this process to work. I think it's by design that we have a CPRB that can't really function well, just to give kind of the impression that the city is trying, but when they actually receive complaints, they make every effort to bury them. So my recommendation for the board members is to attain the highest possible level of skepticism when it comes to interacting with the Urbana Police Department and city staff, because I think maybe the board members don't quite realize the veiled pushback that exists from the Urbana Police Department and city staff. And I heard you just added an agenda item today to talk about the standards for orientation for the CPRB. Well, I think Cecilia Clark has worked for the city for all of the 13 years that the CPRB has existed, and it is the job of the Human Relations Office to develop those standards, and I think they don't exist yet. So I don't know what mechanisms the board needs to employ to make sure that staff do their job, but I think you guys need to be a lot more assertive and stop letting the UPD and the city control the narrative. And I'll just say one last thing. I want to echo the comment earlier from Jane about I think maybe what she was hinting at was privilege. The people who are approaching you and speaking at your meetings and submitting complaints right now, we're doing that with a fairly high level of skill, and we're coming from a position where we can do that, and we can't crack the process. So what do you expect from everyone else? And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yes. Tracy Chung.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Tracy. Thank you.
Okay. Are you going to start the timer?
It'll start. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, I'm Tracy Chong, resident of Urbana. I'm also part of the group proposing recommendations for CPRB reform. I'm going to follow up on the importance of each board member, you guys, knowing the CPRB ordinance like the back of your hand, being extremely critical and skeptical during reviews, and of actions and explanations of UPD representatives such as Richard Searles and city staff. I have watched every single CPRB meeting since 2019, and I'm going to bring up some specific examples that illustrate the lack of critical questioning, the lack of motivation, and how easily you guys, board members, just trust what you are told. During the January 22nd meeting this year, when a citizen showed you complaint documents, which they have a right to, because they're public records, that have complete pages redacted, did any of you follow up with city staff or UPD on this big hurdle in the complaint process? Board members, during the taser utilization review on January 22nd, you guys reviewed a case where a taser was deployed twice on the same person. Once even using the drive stun method, which is generally prohibited under the UPD taser policy. Lieutenant Richard Searles only showed you about a minute of taser cam footage, which gave no context of the whole incident that took place. Based on your comments, you wanted more video, such as squad camera video, to further examine the situation. Board member Ricardo Diaz pointedly asked Lieutenant Searles about producing the squad cam video, and this was great. However, Lieutenant Searles just could not explain why he could not produce the squad camera video, and he also could not answer if there was more footage available from other officers on scene. Instead, he gave some rambling explanations, which, those were just explanations. With these problems and lack of footage, I really could not believe it when you guys, all board members present, voted to approve the taser usage in that case, with the simple caveat that you would like to see footage in the future. I would like to ask, have any of you followed up on this? Did Richard Searles ever produce the additional footage or explain where the footage disappeared to? How could you approve this taser usage just based on 1 minute of video with no context and knowing that some footage is missing? You easily could have put off voting and dug in until you figured out what actually happened during the incident and what happened to the videos. I also watched the taser review by your board on July 24th, 2019, where President James gave a summary of 7 cases. I was surprised at how shallow your questions were, especially since just watching the video and reports, it seems like there were incidents where a taser was unholstered just because someone was running away. According to UPD taser policy, mere flight from a pursuing officer without any other known circumstances or factors is not a good cause for the use of taser to apprehend an individual. However, none of you brought up this issue or even asked further questions. Why? In the meeting on January 29, 2020, City Staff President James admitted to leaving out information about police misconduct from his findings. He basically lied. And his admission was only after the complainant pointed it out during public input. Up to today, have any of you board members followed up with Preston regarding his omission? If not, why? How can you let something that important just slide? I cannot stress enough the importance of being skeptical, digging in, asking questions, not automatically believing everything Lieutenant Richard Searles or UPD representatives or city staff tell you. They all have conflicts of interest, and it may not be in their best interest for the complaint process to work for citizens. As board members, you have to know the ordinance and taser policy, and even the UPD policy well enough to be able to review complaints critically. I hope that as board members, you guys want this job, you guys want this role, that moving forward, you have an intrinsic motivation to do this. Lastly, I have a request of the board. I've asked for documents related to the complaint process through FOIA requests. This includes training documents and complaint reports, and I'm being charged by the city. I feel that this is ridiculous, especially in this climate where citizen oversight is needed for police misconduct, and I really hope you will look into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. I don't see any other hands. There's one comment that came in through email that I will read, and then we will proceed from there. Okay, this statement is from City Council member Eric Jacobson, who writes, "Dear CPRB members, here are my suggestions for CPRB moving forward. 1, review all complaints against police, regardless of disposition of initial review, without requiring complainant to appeal and without requiring notarization. Number 2, review all incidents of use of force, whether a complaint is filed or not. Number 3, review all incidents in which a taser is discharged. Number 4, for each incident reviewed, construct a scenario in which principles of restorative justice could be used to help resolve the conflict and recommend implementation of that scenario to all parties. Thanks for your service in this important role, Eric Jacobson." I want to speak really broadly because we're in a new moment. I think historically on a national level and in many ways here in Urbana. And the moment invites us to look at the ways that we've been doing things in regard to policing and in our case, in regard to oversight of policing. Look at it not just for, what might otherwise be relatively superficial changes, but look at it really at the fundamental level of what are our values, what are the needs of the community, and how do we want law enforcement and how do we want oversight to really work. And I just want the commission members to know and everybody who's listening to know that we are committed to engaging in that process in every way we know how. I've had a chance to review the petition. There are a variety of assertions of failure on the part of the CPRB. There are a few that I think are, I might not necessarily agree with it in its entirety, but for the most part, I want to acknowledge that that the CPRB has not lived up, I think, to community expectations in the way that the community expects us to, and in the way that I think a lot of the commission members expect us to. So that's a starting point. Is I want to acknowledge that we haven't, and I want to make a commitment to looking at all of our policies. We're going to start doing that today. We are not going to get anywhere near. There's a lot of work ahead of us, and I think it's going to take multiple meetings. And I hope that we're able to engage with it in the way that the community has confidence in. And I invite, as I trust the community will invite itself, to let us know if we're not doing that in the way that meets community expectations. So we're going to move on in our agenda to the new item on the agenda that we just added, which is the discussion of board member orientation requirement. And the reason that we added this is that we have a new commission member who has not had the chance to go through all of the orientation, and also because in the city's review of the orientation policies and procedures, it's become evident to us that that I think all of us on the board, including myself as chair, have not been fully compliant with the orientation and training expectations that were made. So we're going to, I'm going to ask Carol Midden to expand and fill in some of the gaps, and we'll try to be as transparent as possible with all of you about how we intend to remedy it and make sure that everybody has the orientation and training that we need. Carol?
Thank you. So as I think has been pointed out by some of the folks who've commented tonight, and also just through internal conversations, we've determined that there are things that have become practice that are not in compliance with the CPRB ordinance, and we intend to join with you in bringing everything into compliance with the ordinance, and because that, at least for now, establishes what the community expectations are. So I wanted to make sure as we begin with a new board member, and as you start to embark on some decision making, that that everybody's in compliance with the training and orientation requirements. So I'm just, it's really brief, so I'm going to read section 1923 just so everybody's on the same page. The Human Relations Office, HRO, shall develop written standards for orientation and continuing education for all CPRB members. The written standards shall be subject to the approval of the mayor and the council. Completion of the orientation program is required before a member is seated. Timely completion of continuing education is required for all sitting members. So it actually took a while to determine what, we have various orientation packets that have been developed over time, but we couldn't necessarily match those up with an approval process with the council. So we had to go all the way back to 2007, and we found what we think is the instance where the training outline was approved by council. It was on the agenda. Well, I actually should be even more precise with my language. It was actually on the agenda of the Committee of the Whole for December 17th, 2007. And it was offered as a motion. It wasn't offered as a resolution, so it never advanced to council. So technically, this has only been in front of the Committee of the Whole, but it's what we have at this point. So what I propose to do, so Ms. Pelmore hasn't been, she hasn't been received any training yet, but in the outline from the 2007 committee action, there's a series of topics that needed to be covered, and I want to circulate this after the meeting to the board members to determine whether or not you've received training on all of these items. And the one thing that I know, or I believe that everybody might be behind on, even if you did receive the original training, is the expectation in this outline was that a police ride-along would be an initial ride-along of 4 hours and then 20 hours annually. So what I would ask then, and I will put a cover, I'll put a cover email with this, but I would ask you to review your level of training on these items, and then we need to very quickly get people up to speed. We need to do the training for Ms. Pelmore. I think we need to schedule ride-alongs for folks so that you can, as you move forward cleanly with voting, that we can be confident that the board members have been properly trained. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that. I'll be sending you more information subsequent to the meeting.
Carol, can the city post the orientation and training requirements on the city CPRB website so that the public can have access to them?
Yes, we can do that. And I would also say that we're absolutely open to, we're going back in time because that's our anchor for the approval that's required. We're not opposed to revising, and we have a couple of different revisions of the orientation package. So we're happy to explore going forward whether you'd like to make changes. We just need to start here because we have council approval for this particular outline of training.
Yeah, you want us to know it's a starting point, not the final ending point.
Yes.
And so if we'll put it on what is now quite a long list of things for us to look at if it makes sense to do so. Mm-hmm. And Carol, the implications for us today, given that is that we will try to reach a consensus and try to get to a point where we have clarity about where the board stands, but we will stop short of making formal motions and putting anything to a vote until the next meeting to make sure that we're in full compliance with the training and orientation requirements.
That's what I would recommend.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, in that light, if I understand, Carol, this was not voted on as the final recommendation, and therefore it's a draft recommendation. I don't have any opposition of working our way through to most of these items because they're good functioning procedures. But as far as I understand, what we have before us is a draft. It is not a mandate.
You mean in terms of the orientation?
Yeah.
No, the orientation that I will be circulating to you was actually approved by the council. So it is not a draft, but it has been approved. However, you may want to make changes going forward. And if we do that, then we'll have to take it back through the council approval process. So for now, we're going to be using the outline that was approved by the council.
Well, if it was approved by the council, okay, so that's different than what I thought I understood. I thought you said that it was approved by the committee of the whole, but not by the council.
You know what? You're right. I'm not being precise again. It was the committee of the whole, right? That's all. That's what we have. That's the best that we have right now. So that's why I'm suggesting that we use that.
Okay, Scott?
Yeah, pardon me. I guess my biggest problem is that I don't believe the board ever reviewed any product from HRO that was ever presented to the council in one fashion or another that for our input in terms of what orientation and training should be. The sentence that's in the policy and procedures manual that we have that goes back to 2012, it's just one sentence that HRO will develop these. And we never had a feedback loop about that. And so I would like us to be able to think about what we consider to be adequate training to be, certainly given the existence and availability of NACAL webinars, just did one yesterday, and that sort of technology-driven stuff that probably wasn't even available when we first made this pass. And I'm not, since I do not know what this committee of the whole approved document looks like and have never seen it, I can't provide input to it. But one of the specific areas about training that I know Ricardo will, will see this coming, is that we do so few appeals. I have pushed the board continually to try to find a way to mock trial so that when we get in these, we don't have problems with who has custody of records, where they're coming from, and embarrass ourselves with having to ask an appealing person to provide us with input. And so, I'm not willing just to say I want to do whatever is in a piece of paper that I have never seen. So that's a hard stop for me.
So Scott, can we say we know that there are gaps. We know that what's before us needs probably contributions for us. I don't see this item as so crucial that we spend more time on it yet. It'll be part of what we're working on. We were operating under staff instruction as to what we were doing as training,
right,
including the ride-alongs, including FOIA training and other stuff. So for me, I'd just like to appeal to put this as a procedural issue that's important, but part of a larger context so we can move on to some of the others.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ricardo. Part of the perception is that the Cprv has been negligent in following the ordinance. But some of this information a lot of this is not in the ordinance, and we were relying on the guidance from city staff. And that guidance was substantially different than the requirements that you sent to us and that you alluded to. So for example, what I recall is that there was an expectation of one ride along per year, not 20 hours per year. And those are really substantially different things. And I'm not opposed to the 20-hour requirement. It's just, I've never heard that before. Megan. Yep.
Sorry, having a little bit of technical difficulty. In regards to the need for further training with us and the information that we haven't seen, would there be a way, and I understand that we have a lot to get through, but since Patrice is new and since I personally, since the community really wants us to be more on top of things, I would really like to redo my training, but I would also like to see this documentation as soon as possible and put it on as an agenda item for us to at least begin discussion about, since this is how we're supposed to be doing this position. And yet none of us, it doesn't seem like, you know, none of us really know what exactly is required of us because we haven't seen the document.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And it probably makes sense for the community to be able to provide input on the training and orientation. So I suggest that we put it as an agenda item for our next meeting prior to it going in front of City Council. Board members, what do you think about that?
I agree, absolutely.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Not opposed to any of that, but I would like to get some feedback from the board members about whether or not they've received the training that's in the existing outline, so that rather than waiting until the next meeting, if we have some remedial training that we need to do, and for Ms. Pelmore, she hasn't had any training at all. So if some people aren't familiar with certain topics, they can, you know, we can put them together in a training so that we can make use of the time we have in the meantime, getting people up to speed on topics they might not be familiar with.
That makes sense.
I think personally, some of us have been on the board for a bit. I think any training that we can do as soon as possible, regardless, would be a really good idea, whether it's just a refresher to get this conversation started, you know, just so that we can rebuild the faith of our community in us, but also just so that we are following the guidelines we should be following. And sometimes, I'm going to be really honest, sometimes I'm like, I don't remember all of this.
Yeah. Patrice, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions. I look forward to the training. I look forward towards the orientation. I just wanted to know, is this going to be attainable in a day, or is this going to be spread out through weeks, months? Just wanted to know that.
Well, there's times listed as if this was a almost like a curriculum about how much time is devoted to each topic. So it's multiple hours. I mean, I don't see it happening in one day. I mean, you could, if we did it all in one sitting, it could be done in a day, aside from probably the ride along. But part of it is, for instance, there's at least on this outline, there's a panel discussion of community expectations for the CPRB, and there are certain groups that are listed as participating. So on that list are NAACP, Urban League, Champaign-Urbana Black Ministerial Alliance, and Champaign-Urbana Coalition for Police Citizen Review, which I don't know is still constituted. So some things I think we're going to have to, rely on pulling groups together. So I don't see it all happening in one day, but that might be useful if I know you have a lot, you have the full curriculum to do, but if we have to pair you up with folks who might not have pieces and parts of this, it might be easier for scheduling purposes to do it in some chunks.
Okay, I think my question was, I guess I was trying to figure out if this is going to be a cohort, is this going to be hybrid, is it going to be independent study, is it just going to be basically a bunch of everything put into, does that make sense? It's like
it does.
Okay, that was the question.
The question makes sense to me now. I can't tell you even exactly how we're going to execute this training.
Okay.
I think some of it will be independent study. Just in the interest of time, we don't have a curriculum. This is an outline of a curriculum.
Okay.
you know, we're going to do the best we can to get everybody up to speed. And then what I would really like is sort of what Mr. Dossett had suggested, which is that you all have input to a training, and then maybe as a group you can do elements of it that might be the new components. So
Okay, thank you.
Patrice, if I can add, I remember the feeling when I got here. I did not know city, I knew the procedural part of running meetings, but there was a lot of stuff that was way beyond my head as far as Open Meetings Act and rules and whatever else. But I like that the proposed curriculum. So I'm willing to be your sidekick or mentor or whatever else, because I've had to figure out things as they came. But the other part is I'm glad that this curriculum is not only police oriented. I did need to learn what the rules are for them. Not that I'm an expert, but I'm more acquainted now. But I also think that including city groups, that is, like somebody said, we should be skeptical. We don't want to be only trained by one view. We want to be trained of several views so we can best represent them and address issues. So anyway, onwards.
Scott?
Quick question. Carol, what's the date on that meeting of the whole that you're referencing as this outline for a curriculum?
December 17th, 2007.
Okay, great. Thank you. And can we get a forward on whatever text you have related to that?
I can send you the memo that was presented to the mayor and city council. I can send you the minutes of that meeting, and I can send you the agenda for that meeting. Does that sound good?
Sure, that's fine. So would that have been written by Todd?
Yes.
Okay.
When he was the human relations officer.
Right, yes.
Okay, so here's my understanding of what we're doing with this. We are putting it on the agenda for the next meeting of the CPRB, which has yet to be decided when that will be, but whenever that next meeting is, this will be on the agenda. In the meantime, and perhaps in the next 48 hours, all of each of us will communicate to Carol how much and what kind of training we've received up to date so that we can get started immediately prior to the next meeting in filling in those gaps. Right? That's the request, Carol?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Does that feel satisfying to everyone? And are we ready to move on?
Yes.
Okay. So moving on to unfinished business, we have the approval of Scott Dossett's report to council.
I guess I have a question. I could not find, at least in the emails that I'm warehousing, that this was ever sent to board members. Have you guys all looked at the report to be co-joined with Assistant Chief Searles' TASER summary report? Are we really ready to talk about this?
I, for one, never received a copy of your report, Scott.
Okay, well, that's good enough for me. We're at a hard stop. Now, I requested that this be forwarded, and I saw a little dialogue that I'm not going to try to get back now in the interest of time. So just a short summary. Assistant Chief Searles presented us with the fact that the original TASER implementation ordinance contained a 1 year kind of, this is what we're doing so far kind of report. Staff, board members, everyone conveniently forgot about that after the TASER ordinance was passed, and we got busy doing reviews. And Searles reminded us. And since I was one of the people, Ricardo and I were on kind of an ad hoc committee from CPRB to help develop ordinance language and work through that with UPD. I offered to do a draft. And that draft has been lingering since January. Prior chair, problems with HRO, staffing, etc. And so it's a easy to read, about 3, maybe 4-page narrative. I did not do a statistical analysis of how often out of incidents, contacts, somebody displayed a taser, or how often it was discharged, nor did I go into the literature and try to find how Urbana might compare with local or regional municipalities and take that to the mat as more of a research job. So it reads, it reads like I would talk and I would describe what we've been doing. And, you know, I think we just need to all read it. My intention was actually to have the board, you know, present feedback to the draft. And if somebody really did want to, you know, roll up their sleeves and look at outcomes nationally or regionally or whatever, and offered to do that, then it could be a more robust and assertive kind of look. But I will leave that all up to you. I got the ball started, and I do know that the assistant chief is wanting to put this in front of council and kind of get this off of his to-do list. But I think it would be, given the controversy this whole issue started, and you know, some intense feelings among the community, I think it would be worth, you know, us taking, you know, 1 or 2, you know, at least one pass at the draft.
So I agree, Scott. I guess I'm feeling some frustration. You know, there's a way in which it seems like there's a lot of passing of the buck, and I want it to stop. So what's the Open Meetings Act doesn't allow us to engage in discussion or debate, but there's nothing to stop you from sending the report to the rest of us. You don't have to rely on city staff to do it.
Oh, well, it has been sent to the chairs. I mean, I didn't feel as if it was my responsibility to forward it directly to the board. If that's the request, sure. I mean, I'll do it right now, and we'll get input. So.
Yeah, please go ahead and do it right now. And is there any reason why we cannot post this on the city website for public input as well?
I want to just channel us. The last we remained at the meeting was that Scott was going to work on it, and he was going to work with the deputy chief also on the laser to look at it and produce it. It's only fair that just because it's early, have them send it to us. We look at it to make sure that it jives with our experience since we've been here, and then put it back for public input, because there will be questions, and there might be questions on stuff that we don't even see as existing yet. So I want it to be very public, but it needs to be, you know, from spelling to facts, not to, you know, diminish your contribution, Scott, but we are all just have one point of view. As a group, we should get input from the public as a group after we have contributed, agglutinated each one of the views. So,
yeah, frankly, I don't know really what public input might mean or how complicated that might be, but certainly I've been trying to route this both through UPD and HRO to get to all of you guys. And if the request is to send it to you directly, then, you know, I'll do that as soon as I can, you know, get everybody's names strung together.
I think, so Scott, I didn't mean to, maybe I'm the one that has failed. Did I receive a copy of it as far as you know?
Yeah, it's been but you know, I mean, you're settling in, you know, I actually considered it to be HRO responsibility. And as you know, Mikkel, in our conversations, I have a pretty strong feeling about the lack of support at HRO that we've had through this whole process. I mean, like globally, the process. And so, yeah, I mean, it's been running around in admin for 3 months. And so I can get frustrated about that. But
can I just say that the board members, it will be sent out by staff, and the board members will have it no later than tomorrow.
Thank you, Carol.
Thanks, Carol. So we're tabling this for discussion at the next meeting. Is that what's happening? Right, after we've had a chance to read and review, we will discuss it at the next meeting.
That's fine with me. I mean, if you want a motion about that, I mean, I think we got consensus about that, don't we?
It seems we have consensus. I guess. Yeah. I think so, Ricardo. I hear what you're saying about wanting to review. We haven't seen it, right? So we want to review it before inviting public input. But it seems like we're then creating a situation in which we're reviewing and probably passing it before posting it publicly.
I don't understand what the difference is. This is a report on what has been going on, and therefore this is, in this case, Scott probably has the longest memory of the group. So it's a summary. If it were a more formal document that was binding in whichever way, I would see putting forward more procedures on it. But this is a summary report. It's not a,
It's not creating policy. All it is summarizing.
Yeah.
Okay. So we want public to be able to have access to the report.
They should be informed. This is our report to them. And then there can be a comment on, hey, what about this? What about that? Because we may have missed the part. But right now, it's just a report back. It's not an agenda.
Yeah, I mean, technically, it's a report to the city council about the implementation. And we're providing, I'm guessing, about half of it. And UPD is providing the other half. So, the way this started is I took Searle's outline and just ripped it off and started filling it in with the experiences that, most of us have had with display reviews and the few discharges that we've had.
Okay. All right. So I think, go ahead, Patrice.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I agree with Ricardo. I think since we're not, from me, I'm starting fresh from this point on, and because the public has been stating that they wanted more transparency and that they wanted to be able to have more input and insight, and for us, to be out there as if not we're trying to hide something or whatever, that we should, just go ahead and send it out and allow them to see it, as well as, we review it as well, because it, like I said, it's just a summary.
I want to make sure I'm understanding, Patrice. You're suggesting that we make the report public prior to us considering it or afterwards?
Okay, what did Ricardo just say? From my understanding, he was saying
Ricardo.
Go ahead.
Ricardo wants the board to review, revise, and likely approve the report before we make it public, because it's not a policy change. It's just a summary of what we've been doing. And so
yes, that's what I meant. But as long as allow them to be able to see it. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Okay. So I think we're like-minded. I think we're on the same page. Are we?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm going to now clarify. We will not post the report in its current form on the website.
Correct.
Got it.
Not until after the next meeting, during which the board will discuss and hopefully approve.
Yeah, and the chief may have something to say about the UPD contribution to the report. They kind of ride together. I don't know. I don't know why they wouldn't want it, but
Okay.
Our partner in writing this is UPD. So.
Okay. Let's. Fair enough. Let's not. If that becomes an issue, then we'll engage with it. But at the moment, let's assume that we can make it public when we're ready to. Okay, new business. First item, change frequency of the CPRB meetings from quarterly to monthly. I guess I'll introduce the rationale for this. I think the public input and I think all of us really recognize that the times call for a greater involvement on the part of the CPRB, and if we engage in, if we decide, and there's still items in front of us, but if we decide that we are going to be more involved, then we just need more time to do the work that we need to do. So, you know, part of what is on today's agenda in letter E is to begin a process in which we review all police complaints, whether they're appealed or not. And if we're going to be doing that, we clearly need more time together. So that's the motivation. And so that's the item for us to meet monthly.
Scott, I'm sorry, Mikkel, could we also, in the event that a meeting is canceled for whatever reason, could there be like some sort of, some way of making certain that we reschedule a meeting? Because what has been happening is a meeting doesn't happen, like I think it was our April meeting didn't happen, but nothing was done to make certain that we still met in a timely manner. And I know that from what I've read of the community's concern, it is that we're not upholding that we meet when we say we're going to be meeting. So is there some way we could just, you know, have like, if a meeting doesn't happen, or if a quorum is if we're unable to obtain a quorum, would there be a way that we put somewhere that then we have to meet within a given period of time to make certain that this item that we didn't get to is taken care of? Am I making sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Our April meeting was canceled and never rescheduled. So, this shouldn't require any kind of amendment, any kind of anything. You know, we're already required to meet quarterly. It seems implied in that if a meeting is scheduled, that if a meeting is canceled, that it then be rescheduled so that we can meet the quarterly requirement. I assume that if we move to a monthly schedule, the same would apply, that if there's a need to cancel, then it has to be rescheduled, because that's what the new ordinance would require of us.
So whose responsibility would it be to make certain that it's almost, because I know we need to have city staff present for a meeting. So whose responsibility would it be? Let us say we have a meeting scheduled for July 12th. And we're unable to do that meeting. So who would send out the email going, July 12th meeting has been unable to be performed. We will instead be meeting on July 23rd or something like that. Who would be responsible for that? Because again, it just seems like it didn't happen, and then there's no.
Yeah, looks like Carol wants to respond to this.
Sure, that is staff's responsibility. As the chair mentioned, right now, in the ordinance, it says that quarterly meetings are required. If you decide to go to monthly meetings and you want to have a little bit more, rather than just have an understanding about rescheduling meetings, if you want it to be a little bit more in the codification realm, you can create rules and for the board, and that could be among the rules. And then that way there'll be, no lack of understanding and transparency on anyone's part about what your expectations are about how canceled meetings will be handled.
I would say, Megan, as a fellow board member, and I'll take the responsibility to it too. For me, that's the chair. And if the chair doesn't schedule us, we call him on it, because he's the one that has to intersect with the staff and say, okay, when's the gap open? what are the rules of announcing it to the public to make sure, and so that it meets the, you know, those dots. But we need to meet as often as needed and as thoroughly as needed. And I would say the bigger question for me is, how do we assure that we have quorum for decisions? Because more frequency, like it was for over the last year, there were several times, it was just really hard to get us together. So if quorum at this point is 2, 4, 6 of us is 3, then it needs to be held because we can make decisions. And that we should call each other, because if I can't make it and I'm your weak link, then you guys need to act without me, and it's my fault, right? But for me, getting into the rule making of it just drags it out. We should just say, Mikhail, we didn't meet. Please get us back together.
Yeah. So fair enough. I think you know, I accept that responsibility, and I want to say I approached the city staff multiple times prior to the beginning of June about scheduling a meeting, and was told each time that you know, in different ways that the city was not prepared to host us, and I even contacted the mayor to inquire whether we can have a meeting publicly announced, consistent with Open Meetings Act, without city staff present, and was told that we couldn't. So yes, I can initiate that. I will initiate it, and you know, the city staff has to be willing participants in that.
Right, but it's in that negotiation. It's like they don't control all their time either. They have 50 zillion things to do. And so the nearest gap, and, you know, so what are the gaps? When can we schedule it? You put the 3 choices out. We get notified, and boom, we move on it, rather than,
that's right.
You know, it's resources more than anything else, right? So we just have to get on with each other to show up as soon as the possibility opens.
In some ways, I hope a monthly meeting makes it easier for us, because in some ways it's easier to track, for example, the 4th Wednesday of every month than it is to track a quarterly meeting. So, but if there are board members that can't commit and can't keep to a monthly meeting, then, you know, we'll have to, I mean, that's a condition for being on the board, right? Like, that's the commitment that each of us makes. Scott?
I'm going to use every chance I get to talk about the lack of staff support in HRO. We have a hit here on our policy and procedures manual, which within the last couple of months, I was shocked to discover I was the only one in possession of one. Literally. And I think that we should formalize whatever this is in that and continue to edit that document and keep it current. It goes back to July of 12. This board really has not had the administrative support that we needed since Todd Rent left. That's why that's the Todd I keep asking about. And if you look at our ordinance, and if you look at a lot of things we're going to continue to talk about in terms of reviewing the complaint process, it gets down to having adequate staff support for this board to be able to do its job. So my biggest question is that, will the city administrator commit to giving us the staff support that we need in order to have monthly meetings? Because I'm unclear that right now we have the manpower on Vine Street to push on that agenda. And I know, sorry, Carol, I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
I make that commitment.
We've talked, Scott, just thank you for raising that. I've started to talk to Carol about it, so I don't think she's taken by surprise by this.
No,
I've complained about it before too, so I know she's not surprised. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that there have been lapses in the past, and we're not going to be perfect, but I'm personally here to join this effort to get the CPRB on a good footing, both with the existing ordinance and to help guide the process, to make changes, to make this more responsive to the community. So you have my personal commitment. And if I have to be the staff person for you, if other folks aren't available, I will be that person.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any concerns about us meeting monthly? Is there any opposition to moving forward with that?
Not at all. I just want to clarify that we are supporting each other and that when we don't meet, we don't want to hold the ship back or down or however the illusion goes there. But just that we'll try to be there, and as long as there's quorum, we accept and support each other's
Yes.
group decision, right?
Yes. And so to clarify, go ahead, Darrell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am in favor, very much in favor of meeting at least monthly. With all of the work that is ahead of us, and particularly at this moment in history, these things we've been discussing require rather more examination than less. So I'm totally in favor of meeting at least monthly. Thank you.
Thank you, Darrell. Yes, these would be required but assuming that the ordinance is approved, this would change the ordinance and would not include any special meetings that the chair could call. And I'm here to tell you that I will call them. So we will have several more special meetings because we have things to do outside of reviews. And so I think in the next 2 months, we should probably expect to meet every 2 weeks, roughly. And I'll work with city staff to schedule those meetings based on everyone's availability. The schedule of the monthly meetings would be the fourth Wednesday of every month. So please already put those on your agenda. We will change the ordinance when we can. There has to be a 30-day public posting about a change in the meeting schedule, and city staff will work with us to make sure that that post is made as soon as possible. Right, Carol?
It needs to be posted after you make the vote to, after you vote to change your regular meeting schedule. So I expect that would be, if we can get enough people on, properly or in compliance with the orientation training requirements, that you could do that if you're going to have another meeting in 2 weeks, that you could have that vote. And then it will kick in by the time the next regular meetings in July. That still gives us plenty of time to get a regular meeting scheduled for the fourth Wednesday in August. So that shouldn't set you back, the fact that you can't vote on that tonight.
Got it. Okay.
Hold on. Just to understand, Open Meetings Act has different. So our regular meetings have to be published for any changes to the regular schedule 30 days in advance. But if we're to call a special meeting, how long before can we put it out so that it's fair warning? Because I think that's the intent of the law. Because I'm with Darrell. We have a lot of work. We need to put out as much as possible and still follow the law.
Yes.
As far as meetings.
I think Carol will correct me, but I think that's a 48-hour notice that we need.
That one I'm not familiar with. I don't know if Vasilia is or not, but I'm happy to research that if she doesn't know.
Yeah, that's the standard notification, and the posting protocol's pretty plain. I think what we're talking about, though, is a 30-day notice because of the change of procedure.
That's a 30-day notice when we change the regular meeting schedule. But the notice for a special meeting, such as this one that we're having, I believe is 48 hours. But of course, we'll check and make sure we're compliant with that.
Well, I guess here's my question. Why can't we vote that we will meet monthly now?
Because there's concern that we've kind of loosely agreed to hold off on votes until everybody has been properly oriented and trained, which will happen in the next few weeks.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
So then, our next, if we're having a meeting within 2 weeks, that would have to be a special meeting, which requires 48 hours prior notice.
That's my understanding. We will check on it. I'm still learning and memorizing, all of the relevant policies.
Yeah, I was just looking at the pamphlet, or not the pamphlet, but the booklet of welcome and general overview that I did receive, and it went
at the last Wednesday of the fourth Wednesday of July. That's our regular meeting, and we will let you know. I'll work with city staff to schedule a special meeting probably prior to that, roughly 2 weeks from now.
Can I make a quick comment, Mikkel?
Yeah.
Can I please be involved in whatever training you guys decide you need to do? Because I was never trained. And I would be happy, to go through that process with Patrice or whoever wants to, so that I can kind of get my feet on the ground. Being around forever has its advantages. You don't really get to.
That's the entire point, Scott. We've agreed that we would let Carol know within 48 hours how much training we have, and she will work with us, and I think with Vasilia, to make sure that we get whatever we need.
Yeah, I made a note. Yes, right. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Although I did write you down as wanting to participate in any training, so we'll be in touch.
All right. So we have a consensus for monthly. We'll put it to a vote in the next meeting. Moving on. Next item, to discontinue requiring police complaints to be notarized. So the introduction to this is consistent with some of the statements we heard during public input today. I think we generally want, as a board and as a community, to remove the barriers to community members putting forth complaints about police conduct, and a notary requirement, which is not in the ordinance, as was pointed out. It's not in the ordinance, but it was, I think, part of the police policy prior to the creation of the Cprv, and it remained on the police complaint form. And so it was de facto policy, and I get the irony of having a formal process of removing something that is not part of the ordinance, but I think in order to provide the kind of protection the community members need, I think we need to codify that there's no notary requirement. So I'd like to open the floor for discussion, concerns about removing this requirement, and I think Carol has an amended form for us to look at.
I do, but I can wait until the people offer comments, or I can show you the form. I'm going to circulate it. We'll post it for comments, but we have prepared a draft form with a couple of features, and one of them is removing the need for a notary, but beefing up the attestation so that it's clear that what people are committing to when they sign this document. So, do you want me to show?
Yeah, Daryl.
May I speak to that? I'm kind of speaking from my legal experience now. I read the ordinance, section 19-28, sub C, and which states the complaint shall be a sworn statement attesting to the truthfulness of the allegations made. But there says nothing in there about notarization. To my mind, notarization adds nothing to the complaint itself, and may indeed present a barrier to some people. Going out and finding a notary and getting it notarized, that to me, that's an artificial barrier that we need to remove at this time. I would agree with Carol that the attestation part needs to be kind of beefed up, as you say. So the people who sign these complaints are totally informed that if it's later found that they've made false allegations, that they're subject to prosecution for perjury. And that's my feeling.
Other comments?
I agree with attestation, and in the office that I work at right now, we do a lot of attestation with the applications, and basically it's under penalty of perjury. Information is true and correct to the best of your knowledge. You're acknowledging it. You're stating the information is true and correct, and you're understanding, like I said, under penalty of perjury. And it's in layman's terms. We do explain it to those that don't understand it. But I think it is something to try and get something notarized, depending on who it is. It could be a barrier, transportation, going to certain places that allow them in there to get it. I agree with taking that off.
And if I may further comment, Mr. Chairman, under present conditions of the pandemic, it might be kind of hard to find a notary. We can't go into banks. We can't go into the libraries. Those are two places where notaries are found.
Yeah, and to that point, and I think it was relatively functional prior to COVID, but I think COVID really showed us how not functional it is under these circumstances, because a lot of complaints were actually filed, my understanding is, were filed in the police department, and I think the police department had a notary present. Certainly there was one present in the city building. But when the city building closed to COVID, it created exactly that kind of, like, where do we go, who do we go to? And I think, nobody's arguing to the contrary, so I don't want to take up more time than we need. But there's really no need for the notary requirement.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Scott.
No, go ahead, Ricardo. I'll follow you.
Well, I'm gonna go much beyond, because I think the notary is the minimum we can do. The other fact is that we ought to put this complaint form everywhere we can. Why isn't it a Google form in which people just go in and put it in, and then once we've received it, then we can do something more formal, to verify the person, whatever else. But I would even go, as I was reconsidering, and a lot of suggestions by people, I recalled that one of my years of experience was in literacy. I am surprised. I read every complaint, I think, like Ms. Chong, I read every complaint of the last 2 years. Number one, it takes a lot of guts. Number two, it takes particular training and conformity with the system as to how to put forward a complaint. And then the most basic is it requires a lot of literacy. The form requires that there was one in which the person just said, I had trouble with this date. You didn't write the date, didn't write who, didn't write, because all they had was a straight out grievance that should have been recorded and doing. So I would even say, let's get rid of this very fast, and let's start considering how do we make sure that the less literate, less educated, or other barriers are also taken off, so we can get to the real amount of people that might have something to say, but right now we have stronger barriers.
Yeah. Megan.
Related very much to what Ricardo said, the barriers, I agree it should be made into a Google document, but however, the biggest barrier I see, I have been teaching students that are second language learners for the last many, many years. The form isn't available in any language but English. And we don't have any, and this is something, and that, again, we've spoken about in the past, and perhaps this isn't the exact moment I should be mentioning it, but we really need to find a way to go out in the community, to our trailer parks, to our lower income neighborhoods, and we need to do it at times when these people are going to be available, so that we can let them even know about the form, help them either fill it out or train them on how to fill these things out, and make sure that all of these forms are available in not just English, and honestly not just Spanish, but also French, you know, and any other languages that we might need them available in. And we need to make sure that or at least I would like to make sure that that is made clear on the form itself, if you need a translation of this form or, you know, anything like that, and that we have people that are available to assist with translations if needed. I'm not sure how that would be done, but I would just like to start making it part of the conversation, because we have such a diverse community and we really need to see to the needs of our entire community and make sure that their voices are being heard.
Yeah, thank you. Scott?
Yeah, this was a Donnybrook when we set this whole thing up. And as I've told this group before, there may be new people listening. Todd and Legal had a strong opinion about the notarization. And I don't know what kind of precedent system they were trying to set up. I don't know law like that, but that's just how this got there. And at the time, we were actually having some real interesting conversations about what was a complaint. I mean, should you accept a complaint that should every note, a field note that an officer makes about an interaction, does every one of those turn into a potential complaint? I mean, we had people from the community advocating that this whole idea of complaint should be very broad. So that was kind of what was happening. The other thing I'll note, contrary to what we heard in public comment, the form is rapidly and readily available on the city's website. You go to police, file a police complaint, it's right there, bang. But it is only in English, in spite of the fact that our internal documentation says that it will be available in Spanish. So we never got that done. The thing I'm concerned about, and I don't have an objection to making this change, because I was one of the people that was this drove me crazy, the notarization as an obstructive sort of idea. And this is another one of these general areas I'm trying to mine right now. I've asked through Vasilia for a rendering from legal about how the union contract between the Fraternal Order of Police and the City of Urbana impacts all of the aspects of our ordinance, vis-a-vis the subpoena power, which we do not have and was taken out of our ability very early on by a rendering from legal. And so my only question about the notarization is whether that has there's any complexity there related to the union contract. Other than that, you know, I think the easier that this can be, the better. And I think that's another rationale for making the HRO the portal. The police shouldn't be the portal. The HRO and our staff person has to be the portal. That way they can bring in all kinds of ancillary equipment. I mean, King School 15 years ago had 27 languages on t-shirts. If somebody comes in and speaks Somali, we should be able to help them in some fashion. But I don't believe that can happen under a complaint filing at UPD. That's not the right environment for that to happen. So anyway, just a couple of thoughts on that. I certainly won't stand in the way of a motion to remove the notarization requirement. So.
Can I jump in? I just wanted to respond to Mr. Dossett's question about any change that we might make with the notary and the FOP contract. And we must have a sworn statement, and the attestation that we have in the draft form now meets the requirement of the contract and meets the requirement of state law. So I was going to show you the form, but all I would do is like scroll through it, but maybe I'll just give you a few highlights and then we'll just distribute it with these other materials tomorrow and post it for folks to look at. And then we can take it up at the next meeting.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and say one of the things I asked Carol to do when when we agreed that they would create a revised version of the form, is to make it at an 8th grade or lower reading level. And there are websites that are available to, where you can paste in text and get the reading level back. So hopefully what we're seeing, perhaps with the exception of this sentence or two in regard to the attestation, is going to be more accessible for everyone.
Yes, and we did do that. Well, what I will say is there are multiple websites to determine reading level, and so if someone, we did put this through several websites, and so everything except the attestation is at an 8th grade reading level now at the chair's request. But depending on if you use a different site, you might get a slightly different result. I just wanted people to understand that. But we have also, so in addition to being simplified, we've also added, as required by the ordinance, and we're going to reinforce this more as we should. There on the form itself, it mentions that as an alternative, voluntary mediation is available at any time, so that people know right out of the blocks that that's an option. We've also included for your consideration whether you want to collect this, some demographic information that might be useful in terms of just for as you reflect on the sources and stuff. If you would find that useful, happy to delete it if you think it wouldn't be useful. And then, as I mentioned, you'll want to read the attestation, but it does, as Mr. Price mentioned, it does make clear that you are signing the complaint and swear and attest under penalty of perjury, among other things. So, so anyway, you'll see that tomorrow.
Sorry, I thought you were going to put it up on the screen for us.
I was going to. I can. Let's see. I've never done this before, so I hope it. Oh, here's how it works. Great, cool. There we go. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, so just scrolling, scroll. Oh, there we go. So you'll see right here, as an alternative, voluntary mediation is available at any time right here. This section that is shown in yellow is the section that has demographic information. You'll see it's pretty simple in terms of the directions. And then the attestation, which is here, you'll want to review carefully. Now, I think that one of the things that we should that we can consider as we think about your concern about having people that are not familiar with filling out forms or whatever, we need to decide where the screening is going to go through, because Ms. McClintock, who testified or who made a comment, and she and I had talked about a complaint that she had made, and part of it was she asked a series of questions. So there needs to be a screening process in the HRO or somewhere, and we can talk about where is the most appropriate place to make sure that the complaint is in a form that it's ready for a response, because a series of questions is not the same as a complaint. So I just use that as an example. There will be others where people don't articulate it, maybe in like, what policy are you suggesting was violated? That we might not know what their concern really is if they just describe something that happened. So I think there's more discussion, and I don't know that could be embodied in the form, but it certainly would be embodied in the screening process.
Scott.
Carol, could you pull that form up, please, to the top? What I like about this is the third paragraph should be submitted to the City of Urbana Human Relations Office. So the public can take note that this change would mean that UPD would not be directly, at least, receiving complaints from citizens. That we're trying to get that into another domain that's not directly related to the front office and having to get through the door and sliding the piece of paper underneath there. Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, and we completely support the single point of entry into the process, because you're right, it's confusing, it's not appropriate. There is a screening that needs to go on for multiple reasons, and we're going to talk about another one in a little while that I would like you all to consider. So yeah, and we'll have to change the website because it doesn't fully explain that right now.
I got a couple of questions about the form. Now, on the form, does it have to be an original ink signature, or can this be emailed, scanned in, faxed in? That's my first question.
As long as we have, I think as long as we make it clear that if we decide that we're going to take electronic signatures or something like that, that if you are affixing a signature, then you are taking this responsibility for the accuracy of the document.
Okay. And then the second thing is, are we, and I'm asking because I'm new, is there a reason you can download the application, correct?
You can. Yeah, there are PDFs right now. And
okay.
Yeah. But it sounds like you all are interested in fillable forms.
Yes, that's what I was getting at. And then is there a reason it cannot be submitted electronically? Or will we be able to do something like that in the future?
When you say submitted electronically, I just want to be sure I understand, because I'm not
Meaning I go on the site and I fill it out and I hit submit and it goes directly to HRO.
I'm sure that we can get there. That's not the way it's set up right now. I will say that, and I should have gotten an update from the staff member who's working with me on this, is that we're working on the possibility of using CitizenServe, which is a software, I guess, that that we use in various for building permit applications and stuff, that would be that electronic way of submitting it. And I forgot to get an update on that, but we're looking at that very possibility. So yeah, we're trying to make it easier for people to just, you say, fill it out, push a button, and then that would also help with routing of the complaints.
So when you get that information, will you be able to give us the update on that?
I'll make a point of giving you an update at your special meeting in 2 weeks or so.
Okay, thank you.
In the meantime, until a web form is set up, certainly it seems like the city should be able to receive the complaints via email.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because that's also an electronic submission, right?
Yes, yeah.
I would just like to mention again that somewhere on the form, I really would like that if we put something about it, it says you can visit our website, but I think there should be a way that people can also call and speak with somebody if they need to. I also would like somehow for it to be put that if a translator is needed, because again, at least my personal experience is I work with so many people who are not familiar with computers. They're not familiar with how to navigate the web. And I think that we run the risk of leaving out, in my personal opinion, some of our most vulnerable citizens if we don't find ways to communicate the way in which they most commonly communicate.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm really glad you brought that up. That wasn't something that that we had thought about, and I'll have to figure out how we could just logistically manage that, but we will figure out how to address that.
I'm sorry, Ricardo, just one on that topic. You might want to contact the refugee center. They may have people who might have ideas for you on who to contact. I know they have. I've worked with Conhobal interpreters, and we have a multitude of Spanish interpreters as well that we have used. in my school setting. So.
Thank you.
Ricardo and then Daryl.
Okay.
The other way would have been fine. Hey, listen, Carol, we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel. Last time we were in meeting, I saw the Champaign site. It's the same way that they file a complaint towards any citizen, or I mean any city employee, and then they take it from there. It gets separated afterwards. That was easy enough for me, but I just saw the Chicago, Google Champaign complaint about police. They've got all five ways of generating a complaint. Straightforward. You just click on it. You say file a complaint. You get phone, online mail, visit, and litigation complaints. We're discussing many of those things. We don't have to reinvent them. If they're complying with state law, then there are ways. If there's a contract locally that is different, my question would be, why must the local contract with police be different than one in Chicago or Champaign? The point is, we need to make this easy, accessible, and fast. We should not drag ourselves out, add the changes as we need to, but pick, like Scott mentioned, pick an easy way that eliminates barriers as fast as possible. I understand things must go back through legal, but we're in the same state of Illinois as far as legal.
No, I do want to just clarify. Whatever I say about trying to work something out in terms of using a different mechanism to accept the complaint, it's not based in the signature. That's not the issue. It's the technology. I mean, you just have to understand that Urbana is not quite as up to speed as some other jurisdictions. We just stood up CitizenServe in the last year. So, it's just we're a little behind because we don't have the same resources to stand up systems wholesale. So we'll get there. I just might not be able to do that immediately, but we will absolutely take them via email, and we can get a fillable form, and we'll just work towards the optimum, which is what you described.
Daryl?
Yes, thank you. I'm wondering I don't know if at this point, if this is technologically possible or not, but why can't the complaint form be translated into one of the languages that has been mentioned tonight, placed on the website? You can just click on it if you need that particular translation and go from there. I think that'd be the swiftest way. If that's not technologically possible, I understand if it wouldn't be, then we should go with finding a translator.
I think the issue that Ms. McGinty was raising was if somebody needs to make a phone call, but the translation of the form itself, we will get that taken care of.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I call the question?
Yeah, we're not. You can. We're not going to make formal motions and votes, but we can see if we have consensus. I think we do. Okay. Is anybody opposed to? Well, so here's where we are. We were looking at getting rid of the notary requirement on the form, and then we transitioned from item B into, I think, item D. So it's okay, but I think let's start with item B. Is anybody having any concerns or any opposition to getting rid of the notary requirement?
No.
Okay, so I think we have consensus on that. And then in regard to item D, we're not going to be making a decision today. Carol will send us the forms. We will review, and when we reconvene, we can suggest amendments or take the wording and approve it. Is that consistent with?
The one thing I would say as I realize it, what we have for you is the complaint form itself. We haven't done the appeal form yet, so we'll follow up with that.
Okay, and we can do them one at a time. Let's not wait on updating the complaint form because
Right.
the appeal form isn't ready.
Right.
There's an appeals form on the web.
The revised form, Scott, in which the language is simplified.
Well, I didn't know. I mean, the last time we had a meeting, we were talking about appeals forms, or I was talking with someone. I'd never seen an appeals form. I didn't know one existed. Now one does.
No, I think we have used them before, Scott. So they've been part of the packet as people went up the line. So maybe just hadn't paid attention to it, but I'm pretty sure it's been in my hands at the meeting.
Okay, well, we're going to talk more about appeals, I think, as we develop some of these other topics. So I'll let it lay. But I did note that they are on the form, they're on the website, and most importantly and appropriately, there's a real easy conduit from the CPRB homepage to both of these forms. And prior to my last login, which is today, I've been away for a couple of weeks, you really had to drill around and hunt and peck and go to the police to get to it. So thank you for getting a link, not only a clear link from the police side for appeals and complaints, but a clear link from the CPRB side for appeals and complaints. So that's great. Thank you.
Okay, we are on item C, to add an administrative step to the police complaint process. I'll introduce it briefly and then give Carol the floor to walk us through it. Sometimes new procedures are necessary to respond to a situation that hasn't come up before. And so the situation that's currently happening is that there is an influx of complaints, some of which are, I think, exactly the sorts of things that I think the community wants the CPRB to be reviewing, and other things that are perhaps, and I am using the language perhaps because I think it's up to us. This is what we're going to look at together. But there are potentially things there that perhaps it doesn't make sense for the CPRB to review, in the sense of it not being a useful use of all of our collective time. So, so I'm going to ask Carol to present some of the complaint data to us, de-identified, right? Just so we're looking at the content of the complaint, and then what I'll invite is some discussion about, is there some part of this that we perhaps want to create a policy that doesn't require as much oversight as other types of complaints. So Carol?
So thanks. So I want to say I wasn't going to show the matrix that we had prepared, because I wanted to keep this a little bit more, I can describe the matrix and what it includes, and I'm happy to put a redacted version on the website. What it includes is all the complaints that have come in that received numbers. There are some that don't receive numbers because we think they're not qualified as complaints, and we can talk about that too. But in the matrix, what it shows is that for a variety of categories of general nature of the complaint, we think, and when I say we, I mean myself and Rich Searles, who's sitting in the room here with me, we have attempted to put these in two buckets. And I think what it goes back to is maybe what Mr. Dossett had mentioned in the beginning, which is, or maybe not the beginning, but partway through the conversation, which was, what was a complaint? It's not defined. Misconduct isn't defined, but within your rules, you could sort of decide on a process to handle certain kinds of complaints in one manner or another. And that's what we're trying to explore with you. So what it showed in this matrix was that of, I forget how many complaints there were altogether, but it was 2/3 of them were in these administrative categories, according to our characterization, and then 1/3 was in these more substantive categories. And we believe that your time is best spent on substance, and that another kind of process for administrative categories might, for these administrative categories might be warranted. So in a minute, I'm going to show you a couple of flow charts that we put together about how, to the extent that you are interested in any way parsing these kinds of complaints, what that process could look like. I've put together, Rich and I have put together a list of potential categories, and some of these are based on actual complaints that we received that we think were more of an administrative nature, and some we went into certain policies of the police department that we think, even though there's a policy associated with it, we also don't think it would be worth your time. So let me just read through that list just to get you thinking about what those categories might be, and I can circulate all this. So some of the potential categories: a technical violation of the CPRB ordinance. So if there were untimely responses or alleged untimely responses, smoking by a police officer or use of tobacco, the officer's general demeanor or behavior, use of seat belts, an individual didn't like how a call was handled or that they didn't get a timely call back from the officer regarding an incident. Meal breaks, use of facial coverings, lost property during an arrest, socializing while on duty, vehicle use and minor traffic infractions, personal appearance and uniforms, complaints related to FOIA, off-duty conduct, composition of press releases, interpersonal relationships. So, you know, when you think about the kinds of things that you expect to see, talking about, you know, an individual not liking how an officer handled a particular call related to a robbery or something like that is different than maybe a use of force type thing. And so we're offering a series of categories that we want feedback from you, and then we want feedback from you about whether you're interested in having this administrative, this process where you would divide administrative complaints of whatever categories you want from the substantive complaints. So I'm going to share my screen again and show you just a few options that we came up with. They're by no means exhaustive. If you're interested in some variation of this, you know, we're just trying to explore something that we think would add efficiency to your work.
Carol, can you just pause for 1 second? I'm noticing that there's some hands that are coming up, and it's not the first time. So I just want to speak to it. I think at this point, we're not going to invite public comment, but I think we want the public comment. So I want to encourage everybody who's on the call or watching to contact me as the chair of the CPRB, contact the entire board. Please let us know what you think. And I've been also spending time setting up individual calls and walk and talks, because I really want to hear from everybody in the community that wants to talk to me. And then, of course, we'll have another opportunity for public input at the beginning of the next meeting. So thank you.
Well, and I would add to that, to the extent that people want to make suggestions, if they get them in prior to the meeting, we can adapt and then present you with revised materials. So that could be useful too. So, okay, let me see from the beginning. Okay, so these are what we're calling administrative versus substantive complaints, and we've developed 3 possible options. You may like one or want to adapt it, or one not want to consider the whole thing. So the first one would be driven by the HRO. So the complaint would be filed. It would go into the HRO as the single point of entry, and then the HRO would review the complaint and classify it according to these predetermined categories that we agreed to. And so it would either go the administrative route or it would go the substantive route. It goes substantive, it goes through the normal investigation and the CPRB process. If it's determined to be administrative, there would be an appeal. In this model, the appeal of the categorization of an administrative complaint would go to me as the city administrator. And then I could then reclassify it, or I could say, no, we're sticking with administrative. And then it would be an internal police review and disposition. So that would not, that would no longer involve the CPRB in that particular disposition. So then there's the HRO driven process that has oversight from the CPRB, more like real-time oversight. So the complaint would be filed, the HRO would classify, and then the administrative complaints would periodically go to some composition of the CPRB for review to make sure that you agree with the classification. So that could go to the full board, that could go to the chair, or that could go to a subcommittee that you would designate. And then again, it could be reclassified or it could stay administrative, and then it would be disposed of internally in the police department. And then finally, a more active role for the CPRB in doing this classification would be that the CPRB, the complaint is filed, and then we would basically, the HRO would come to you on a regular basis and say, here are the complaints, here's how I've parsed the complaints, but it's really for you, CPRB, to decide what the proper classification is. We've offered our recommendation, and then the classification is made, and then they take their tracks through the process. Either it's substantive, goes through the whole regular process. So it would go back, the CPRB would categorize it, and then if it's substantive, it goes back to the police, or it would be forwarded to the police department for an investigation, and then go through the whole process that way. Otherwise, it's administrative and gets lesser level of participation from the CPRB. So those are that's the gist of it, and I'm happy to talk about any of that with you all now.
Thank you. For me, and there's I think a lot here for us to talk about. For me, something that's missing from all three flowcharts is some degree of oversight from the CPRB. So even if we agree that there's certain categories that are most appropriately dealt with internally by city staff and police, I would want there to be still some kind of record keeping of those complaints along with the disposition that would then be available to the CPRB in maybe a quarterly report or in some kind of feedback loop, so that we have some way of tracking what's happening, that there is some kind of follow through. And if we have concerns about a particular case, that we can still kind of look into what's happening there, even though we've agreed that it's not a CPRB issue.
Okay.
And that's sort of my initial reaction. And I think what we, obviously we need to get everybody's input here. So I open the floor to the rest of the commission members.
Well, it seems to me as if the second and third options that Carol's submitting provides for that, Mikkel, but these are brand new things that I'm looking at here. Certainly the one HRO driven process links us in after any decision on an administrative or of course substantive level. And I can't flip her screens. I can't flip her screens, but this one, of course, the next one would have us funneling everything. In theory, a complaint comes in, and either an ad hoc group of us or someone has to go and classify and wrap the complaints, before it even occurs to, in terms of the internal police review.
Yeah, I'm with you, Scott. I'm with you. Let me just clarify. I agree that in the proposal, there's room for the CPRB to have an active role in determining how the complaint is classified. I'm not talking about that. I think that's important. And I think that it's also important that even things that are classified as administrative that go into that right-hand blue column, the end process there in the flow chart right now is internal police review and disposition. There's not any indication that the CPRB, that there's any kind of feedback loop to the CPRB after the fact about the disposition and like whether there was some kind of follow through, et cetera. And I think we need to be able to track that as a board.
Gotcha. Yes, I agree. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I would like to say that I am in favor of the third model that Carol has presented to us, simply because I am in favor of more CPRB involvement rather than less. And I do agree with the chairman's comments regarding a loop back to us of any internal police review and dispositions. That should be standard through any model that we might see fit to adopt. I would also like to say that this is, from my point of view, a point of departure, and that we may need to revamp it at some future date. But I think this might be, model number 3 might be a good place to start. Thank you.
Could I just add a comment to Mr. Price's comment? I think whatever we do is just something that we will try and then see how it goes and then refine it or scrap it or add to it or whatever. I think we're trying to manage the workload in a way that makes the most sense for everyone. And so we can try something and then we'll find out it either does make sense or it doesn't. And we're not, and because this would be under your CPRB rules, it wouldn't have to go back to council or anything. It's just how you want to manage your own workload.
Yeah, and I want to clarify, especially for the members of the public who are listening, this is not an attempt for the CPRB to reduce its workload. We're actually talking about increasing our workload. So in the 4 years that I've been part of the CPRB, the board has been exclusively, except for TASER reviews, exclusively an appeals board. So we were only reviewing appeals. We're about to embark on a number of changes that I think are designed to create a much more involved CPRB in which we're active in all complaints rather than just the appeals. And so again, this is, we're expanding our oversight, not reducing it here. But given that we are expanding our oversight, it makes sense to create more clarity about what sorts of complaints we want the full CPRB to review and engage with, and if there are categories of complaints that maybe do not require the entire board to be involved. So that's, I just want to make sure there's a shared reality about the context in which we're looking at this. Ricardo, you're on mute.
Okay, I hear you, Mikhail. And yes, this is part of the change, of the structural changes that we're considering, right? So it'll be good to hear outside comments. But the context was good. I want to take a step back just for a second because we have Carol here present, and I think it makes sense. The complaints against employees of the city, as far as I can see right now on the website, is an online form that says if you have something to say, positive, negative, this is the form. I'm looking at urbanaillinois.us/citizens-voice.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are sometimes things that have been coming up that are, for me, complaints about you about the clerk, about anybody else. For me, those are complaints that that are not relevant to CPRB unless it's about an investigation or a specific case. So I can see that, because whatever we do here, as far as our model as to how much we see, there needs to be a place for us to, as we classify administrative, police or otherwise, it needs to go somewhere that, I agree with Mikhail, it needs to come back for us to review. But I see these parts, these changes, as they are proposed, part of, we need to get through our backlog and then set up a longer term structure changes. So I would say we should do, like Carol said a little bit there, on let's do some changes that will enable us in the short run, but at the same time start looking at what other changes need to be done. There were some really good, you know, not the proposal, the one signed by so many people.
The petition.
The petition, thank you. But also in other public comments and other emails we've been receiving. There's a lot of really good ideas that need to be put on a table, categorized, and then brought back as to how do they fit a model of police review. And I don't want to get too caught up on choosing something as if it were final. Let's move fast. I think Daryl's true. This is the time to do it. But the long-term stuff really needs consideration, and it might need approvals, and it might need legal and whatever else. Let's do as much as we can within the parameters that we have in front of us, move on them. Yes, make some mistakes, but with a good intention of checking ourselves so that we can put those in the bucket for the long term.
Yeah, thanks, Ricardo. Carol?
One of the things that occurs to me, because complaints were not defined and because misconduct was not defined, is that, you know, using this process a little bit before you get through the full, you know, this idea of parsing out some of the existing complaints, that when you get to the point of revising the ordinance, you might actually have some actual experience handling different kinds of complaints in a different way, and you might want to say, we now think we know better how we want to define misconduct, as opposed to any violation of a police department policy by a sworn officer. So I think there's something to be said for perhaps piloting this, because I think we'll all learn something from it.
Mm-hmm. And my understanding, and this is in relation to Ricardo's point, you know, again, the Open Meetings Act prevents us from, you know, really having any kind of dialogue outside of these open meetings. And so, you know, we've all been thinking about these things, but we haven't really had a chance to engage with them as a body. My thinking in terms of working with the city to set the agenda for each meeting is that there are three categories of, you know, apart from the reviews themselves, there's sort of three categories of agenda items for us to look at and see if we want to revise. The first is how we reinterpret the ordinance. You know, can we interpret it differently that I think is more consistent with what the community wants us to be doing, but that doesn't actually require changes to the ordinance, right? So all of these items here today, and you know, like that's where it made sense for us to start, because we can just do that without, you know, involving the city council. So that's the first category, and there are more items in this category than could fit on today's agenda. The second category are recommendations that the CPRB wants to make that are designed to, they're recommendations to change the existing ordinance governing the CPRB. And my understanding is that the mayor and city council want us to engage in that process and are looking forward to receiving those recommendations from us. The third category is even more complex, which is, I think I want us to be examining the ordinances governing the way that the city that Urbana is being policed, and possibly make recommendations to the mayor and city council in regard to those ordinances. And so that's the third category. And we'll make our way from one category to the next, to the third, as, like I don't want any delays. And I also don't want us to rush into doing something without gathering the necessary input from the public and without really taking the time to think through the implications of all the changes. So we're gonna do it without delay and hopefully without rushing.
Could I just ask for a little clarification, Mr. Chair, which is, I like to talk about chunks, and as you chunked out the work, I see them as linear. So the most expeditious thing to do is to work within the existing ordinance and, as you say, reinterpret and carve out, things that you can do with your rule making, your setting rules for yourselves. And then the next chunk of work is to offer amendments to the ordinance itself. And then this last chunk of work, which is a very big chunk, has big implications as you put it into the context of the overall, how do we want to approach public safety and policing in the city. And I see that as something that will be led, in elsewhere, and the CPRB influences it, but not that effort will, because it's part of something much bigger and has really significant resource implications. So I just don't want people to try to, we need to move forward in a, in a thoughtful manner and make the progress we can as quickly as we can. And that to me means incremental as you had laid it out. And I just want to make sure that everyone is thinking of it the same way.
Scott?
I don't see any precedent, rationale, or anything for the administrative review. The ordinance just doesn't support it, and our current policy and procedures manual does not support it. I would remind members of the public and some of the members that have been on this board for a while that CPRB has never really always been an appeals only board. I reviewed every complaint for years before the bottom dropped out of staff support. And I think really the complaint process got forced on the UPD because there was nobody else doing the work. That's worth bringing up because there is a rich history of complaints. And I would suggest one of the first things that we should do is look at the data that we have. When the complaint form and summary mechanisms that Ricardo will remember were put in place and were talked about on about a quarterly basis, we came up with a couple of very critical, in my mind, columns to that spreadsheet. One of them is a randomized officer ID. The second one was the nature of the complaint. And so wherever that data is in the city building, as we move forward in an environment where we are being challenged about our transparency and we are about to enact a procedure which would erase complaints or could be shown to erase complaints by members of the community, I think we ought to have an evidence-based system to go on. And so I'm hoping that beyond the an annual report that I have that's a decade old or 7 or 8 years old, there's some data that we could look at so that we could help steer ourselves in terms of categories. My problem with making this go right into the CPRB is that I don't think we're prepared to do that analysis, and I don't know whether we can really get to that data to let us look at what historic precedent and complaints are, frequency, officer ID, and that sort of thing. I'm generally receptive to the idea, but I think we got to really be careful about how we move forward here, because some of these things that are getting classified kind of as administrative or, in a lower classification, I think have brought us to this point. It's been feedback from the community through that complaint process, which is the only way they had to kind of rattle our cage. That is why we are here today. And I want to honor that. And so I don't know exactly what that means in terms of all these systems, because again, for anybody out there who's listening, we just saw the flowcharts for the first time. We're literally having this discussion right now, but I'm not willing to hop on the administrative review board, administrative review sort of thing. I'd love for us to look at data and see what we have. And that way we will be able to not just anecdotally talk about non-consequential complaints. We'll be able to look at what the complaints we've got for 10 years and let that lead our categorization. And let us look at timelines. I mean, obviously, we're in a real interesting time right now. It should be a surprise to no one that complaints have ramped up, because this is the era of George Floyd and all of those other names we could spin out, right? And I think if we're going to be square with our community, we need to be very careful about how we route these, especially since we haven't had a firm base to begin with in terms of how complaints get to HRO and how they're dealt with. So I just want to be real careful about this. And I think we ought to look at data. And I think then we would be able to justify the decisions that we make a lot better. I kind of like your list, Carol. I don't think, a lot, we could haggle over that a little bit, and I'm sure we will in the future. But we have information that we could use to make a reasoned, more science-based analysis of that. And I think the community requires that we do that. So,
Ricardo? You're on mute.
In general, Scott, I'm in agreement. Data is an important thing. It should jive with what we want to do. In this case, though, the website provides, at least our internal website, when we can see all complaints, it provides the last 2 years of complaints in the full complaints listing. As we know, few have made it to the appeal process endpoint, which is us, but they've been accessible to us. And if you and I wanted to sit together with that list, we could probably look at that data as is. Going back 10 years or whatever else means that the present staff was probably not here, and to call that into question would just provide a ghost for us to be shooting at, because we're never going to hit it. Carol's period, I don't know how long you've been here, but it's been a relatively short time. And judging from what I see in the city, it's a skeleton crew, even for the police going out at night. And that was my first realization when I did a ride-along. 2 officers that night patrolling the city, plus a sergeant somewhere in the building taking up. That blew my mind. We are a one Walmart town, and therefore the taxes and the number of personnel just do not jive for a full consideration every time. We have to do things as we see the best knowledge in front of us. So for me, that's the last 2 years. The last comment just has to do with of the changes that fit within our realm even right now. And I think the proposal group from the citizens has put forward has very good points. Some are based on they just didn't know. There is no written record of all the complaints. Well, yes, there is. We were presented by them. We saw them every time that we met. There was only 2, there was only 5, and the disposition of them came forward. Those are easy to report. But the fact that we haven't gone to the council, our chair, to say we have 5 pendings. The last time we reviewed 5 tasers, and one was actually an actual what's it called, trigger. Then those are easy to take care of, and we ought to only at minimum for the responsiveness, but 2, to set the record clear so that we're all working on recommendations that are validly based. And that's not quote data, that's information that we all need. I don't need to turn it into data. We just need to all be based on what are the facts, and it's available to us so that the proposals that the citizens are considering get enriched by that information. And they're easy to do. We can go back and just feed everybody the same water so that we're not confusing what the long-term issues are. So I'm supporting you, Scott. It doesn't sound like it, but we can do it very fast and actually satisfy everybody's appetite for doing change the right way.
So I want to check to see if I'm following, Ricardo. You're reminding us that, of course, as commission members, we have access to an online portal where we can review the complaints. The public, of course, doesn't have that access. You're suggesting that we pull together a summary table, just to let people know what has been happening in regard to complaints for the last 2 years, let's say. Yes, and make that publicly, post that on the city website. No identifying information, I think, right? Our goal here is to inform the community about the nature and frequency of specific kinds of complaints.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the annual reports, which we haven't done, are supposed to do. The final page of those was a matrix, actually with the randomized officer ID removed of that kind of information: times, dates, infraction, maybe some demographics. I'm not sure. I think Ricardo just offered to look at the last 2 years of data with me and play around with it. And actually, I want to do that too, because there are some, I'm finding some things that aren't in the portal that I'm hoping are there. Of course, I'm trying to recreate the system that was available, back in the good old days. But there were a couple of cases that I couldn't find chief response letters for. I at least want to tease that stuff out and see if that's in the system somewhere, so that we can literally open a complaint with the complaint form by the citizen and close it with the response letter from the chief. And it is in our purview to hold for I think 5 years some of the internal investigation reports. I'll be perhaps redacted, and I want to check that. And I haven't been able to spend much time on the portal in the last couple of weeks. So,
Todd, but that information, while it was not codified in a report, I mean, we went from Todd to Alex to nobody to Alex. And then eventually we got Preston for what, I don't know, a year and a half or 2 years. And now it's been partially put on Vasilia, but she has the other jobs too. So part of it has been that we haven't had the staff, but again, we're such a small town that pulling together this is not a big deal for us. And as we've discussed it in meetings and we've gone through every line, the thing that we have not done is put it in a spreadsheet to say we did 5 of them and our chair was to report. So I don't think that this is beyond us, whoever. I'll work with whoever to do it.
Volunteered you and I for an ad hoc committee to do it, but I don't know if you didn't hear that.
I know, and we've done that before.
I accept.
Yeah, well, there you go. He accepted. I didn't yet. But
No. I accept
On my
Scott
behalf.
volunteering,
Thank you.
and I would be grateful if Ricardo joined him, but obviously that's his discretion.
Yeah. I mean, if the portal is going to be the mechanism by which we transmit these, then I think it's incumbent on us to look at the portal for completeness.
Yes, and actually we'll be able to, I'm sorry. Yeah,
and I've trolled and I've looked and I've moved forward, but you really need a systematic review.
No, actually the systematic will be for us to create a little matrix to say this is missing, and that'll be probably on Carol's hand to say these 3 documents are missing. Make sure you put them on there because we're going to fill up our matrix correctly and fully.
You're describing a kind of audit, and I think that would be useful. I want to say I've asked Rich and Carol, and I think that they've delivered to make sure that every single complaint, some of them were originally not given a number and not entered into the system, but I've asked them to make sure that every complaint has a number, is entered into the system, and so is therefore available for us to look at. And again, I think we are starting to move towards some kind of CPRB oversight of every complaint.
So a couple things. One is that, I had mentioned a matrix earlier that we were going to redact, and it was going to show how many of these complaints we had put in our admin category versus the substantive. We can post that to the portal so that it gives you a head start on, it's not everything because we did it, I think it was May of 2018 to May of 2020. So you might want to add to that. There's certainly more recent things. And we have not yet added numbers to the things that we didn't number. So that has yet to be done. So I just wanted to clarify that. That's not.
Thank you. But it is in the process of getting done.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Everything gets a number no matter how it's disposed of, right? Everything gets a number no matter how it is disposed of. Okay.
Yes, now that is true.
Right.
So we're not voting on anything. I guess, I'll make public where I stand on this. In the categories that Carol outlined to us, there were a number of things that my reaction was, oh, absolutely, the CPRB should be reviewing this. Complaints about the demeanor of the law enforcement officers, complaints about lost property, and I think complaints about off-duty contact. This is not an exhaustive list. I'm just saying there are definitely things in that were listed that I think we should be looking at very carefully. There were other items, other categories that Carol listed that personally I think would distract us from the job that I think the community wants us to do. I don't know that an officer smoking is something that the CPRB wants to review. I don't know that not use of seatbelts is something that the CPRB needs to be reviewing. And I think there is room for us to really examine category by category the things that we think might reasonably be placed in this administrative category that would still be engaged by the city and police, still investigated, still responded to, and still have some oversight by the CPRB, but not undergo a full review process. Thank you, Carol. Yeah. I don't know what else we need to do today. What I'm hearing from the board is that there's openness, there's a consensus for us to at least look at the categories and see if there are some things that we might agree could be handled through an administrative mechanism. I think I'm not hearing any opposition to my request for there to be in the right-hand column still some kind of feedback and still some kind of mechanism for the CPRB to look at the dispensation of administrative decisions. and then we can come back and revisit whether the CPRB wants to be centrally involved in categorizing as administrative versus not, or if we just want to have some oversight over the city staff that engages that process. You know, I can imagine good reasons, you know, for going in either of those directions.
Yeah, and I think that sounds good to me, Mikhail. And I guess for the community, I just want to kind of think through, and I'm doing this on the fly. They submit an appeal.
A complaint or an appeal?
I'm sorry, a complaint. They submit a complaint. Thank you. And the clock starts for a response from the HRO or the CPRB. So as we talk about doing this triage, I'm not going to try to juggle numbers on the fly, but we just need to be cognizant that one of the criticisms has been slowing things down and not getting back soon enough. And we need to figure out how, you know, whoever is going to do this, how the timing works out so that we cannot, so that we don't get slow. Of course, they've got control about the appeals process because they get the feedback from either the admin review or CPRB or UPD or however we work the outtake side of this, which we have to work on. We've worked on the intake side, but we haven't worked on the outflow side yet. And so that's kind of on them. And then there's another time reset. But anyway, that was a note I made, that we need to consider the timing implications of this.
Can I clarify then? We have now, as a group, agreed that at least two of us are going to provide that summary of what's there. The Open Meetings Act in this case applies in two people. There's only two of us. But if I would suggest a third person, now we can't have a subcommittee. I just want to clarify that so that we act above board. And then I have a suggestion for the agenda, the next agenda.
Great question.
Yeah, hold on. So there can be, I'm also still learning, so I'm clarifying with you. My understanding is that there can be a subcommittee that's larger than two, even if it's larger than quorum, if the individuals in that subcommittee do their work independently and not conduct their business outside of an open meeting. So as long as it's just the two of you, you can chat freely with each other as you do the work of creating the table and the spreadsheet. If there are three of us, then we can go independently into the portal and do things, but I think we can't talk to each other outside of the open meeting.
So if that is true, then even if it's three, even assigning who does what is violating the law, because we have to agree who's going to do what.
Well, we can do that here. As long as we do it in an open meeting, we can do it freely.
Okay, so let's agree on what data we need, because otherwise I'm going to get caught into a situation of having to consult each one of you individually, which is painful. So I'd like to get that.
I don't think anybody else has volunteered to do this except you and I.
Actually, I've already asked somebody else to do that. And when she or he reads their email, I really like for them to say yes. I don't want to call you out so that you have a fair yes. So if you'll check your email now, I've asked one of you. I want another set of eyes, but I don't want to put you in the position of having said yes because I called you out here. So.
Well, I can drop out of it if you just want two people. I mean, no.
No, I want three. Two guys is okay, but
okay.
Anyway. So the rule is we would have to agree without being three. So I would have to go to Scott, and then I go to the third person and individually, and then I send them each and say we all agreed. It seems so cumbersome, guys, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to follow the law. It's just that If we're forming a subcommittee, it implies that people are going to work together.
Can I ask city staff to check, since we're a member short, we're a group of 6. Is 2 the most that we can have without working together, without violating the Open Meetings Act, or is it 3?
No, I think it's 2, but I'll check. But I'm 99% sure it's 2.
I think it's 2 also. So then I think let's leave it at 2. If Ricardo and Scott, you're willing.
Okay, the last 1% of my certainty is kicked.
Is what?
We lost Carol.
Lost Carol.
Whoops.
Can't hear you, Carol.
We lost one.
Did I don't know if you heard what I just said because I think my computer locked up. Okay. The last 1% of my certainty kicked in. I got a text, and the most that can meet outside of the open meeting is 2.
Okay.
Okay, friend, the one that got the email, I know you responded, but you're off the hook because of the rules. So don't consider it any longer. We'll be okay.
We can very quickly reach a consensus here, I think, in terms of like what the 2 of you are looking for. I think what would be useful, and others please chime in, I think what would be useful is a table of the nature of the complaint with a frequency for each type of complaint, right? So if there's, I mean, you'll have to make your own categories, but if there's a complaint about improper use of force and there are 3 of them in the last 2 years, then we know that that's a category and there were 3. Probably information about
Okay, so let me read you a list for you guys to react to. So the complaint number, dates, so we can calculate response times, all necessary letters, are they there? So that they can be pushed to make sure that every record is complete. The disposition, I would like officer number, but I know they're redacted right now. The classification, nature of complaint, the frequency, the number of use of force, and taser use numbers, because we just they haven't been included, but it seems like why should they be put together? Because that's what's coming up.
The only thing I think is missing is some kind of data about whether the complaint was upheld or determined as, and I don't have the language in.
Yeah, we've been calling it disposition. And let me say right now, I hate the disposition categories. We should be straight with the complainant to say, you know what, we didn't find enough grounds. Instead of saying, I think right now the language says, I don't know. It's
not sustained. Like, I think it's not.
That's our final. But when they were put in the columns, it basically said, we don't want to hear you. The words were very harsh. They were very technical. We need to be kinder. But we'll come back to that once we bring it back.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that sounds good, Ricardo. In terms of the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Thank you thank you, Scott, for volunteering to work on this. I think we all need it, and I think the public needs it.
Thank you. Since I'm in favor right now, I want to ask that we do something for either the next meeting or that we schedule it. We have a proposal. There was a bunch of people that have been getting together to put together ideas. I think that is exactly what Citizen Police Review Board should be doing. But why should we do it with 6? There's a bunch of other people who put together a proposal that we ought to at least consider publicly as part of a good, fair discussion, and or at that point then get to our one of the 3 or 4 categories that you were talking about, work to do, and say where we think it should go. so that one, we're responsive, but two, it gets more heads into the work. So anyway, it's a proposal, and if you want, I'll put it as a motion.
So I think we are not. You're talking about the petition, right?
That's right.
So that petition has a number of great recommendations, but I think, are not in a position to consider all of them in a single sitting. So my intention is to kind of go through it carefully as I'm going through. I see you, Carol. As I go through all of the input from the community, and parse it into these three categories that I have, and then prioritize and bring it to the CPRB in manageable chunks. So I don't want to leave any of it out, but I think we can't do it at a single meeting. The other thing is I do want an opportunity. Public input is really a series of it's serial monologues, right? People get a chance to tell us what's important to them, but it doesn't give us a chance to engage with them and really understand what are the good reasons for their proposals, and it doesn't give us a chance to clarify. Sometimes they're just misunderstandings, right? So I want to be able to have that dialogue, and I think the way that we can have it is through a study session. And so I would like to create a study session with members of that group, and also members of other, probably other groups in the community, like the coalition, that that I think probably have an important voice in all this. Carol?
I think your approach about taking the proposals and sort of putting them in the different categories is very useful. But I did want to offer that I would like to be given the opportunity as staff to suggest a work plan for the board as it relates to updating the ordinance, and you can fit these conversations into it. But I think what would be really useful, especially now with everything that's happening in the community, and also with the years of experience that we have with the CPRB, is to go back and get grounded in a set of shared values that can then inform the work going forward. Because I think there are shared values, and there are different entities that need to be brought along in the conversation, not just a group who is especially passionate about it. So I'd like to be able to offer you a framework for that multi-session conversation at your next meeting, if you would entertain that.
Yeah, absolutely. What we do is going to obviously require collaboration with city staff. So it makes sense for us to work together on creating the agenda and creating a larger plan. And it makes sense to me that it's collaborative and not dictated by either the city or by the CPRB. So I'm happy to work with you on that.
That's great. Thank you.
So I agree also that a framework, a pacing for changes are great incorporation, but I disagree that the present model that we have has to be the only one. Public comment at the beginning, and then we either address or not address in monologues. It's been an aggravation I have with the school board, with the city council, and now I'm having it with myself. There is no reason why we have these rules that can't be bent to have an established dialogue. Study session or whatever else we call it, we need to have good back and forth. Ultimately, somebody has to make decisions. And if we've been empowered to do that, we will do that. But if we don't hear a reaction right away, then it gets tabled and it gets pushed back. And now we're all unsatisfied. And that really just is not where we should be in this era.
I'm going to look into it, Ricardo. certainly we want a meeting structure and process that serves us, the board, and serves the community in the work we want to be doing, and not be limited by a process. So I'll check with city staff to see if there are any ordinances governing how we run these meetings, and if not, then I'll engage with the CPRB to see if we can find a structure, because I think we do need some kind of structure that better supports the work that we're doing.
I would also just offer, and I'm at the moment it's just a general amorphous offer, but you know, we are standing up our efforts around the comprehensive plan, and we're exploring different ways of engaging the public, and so there are perhaps if there are engagement tools that we're interested in sort of test driving for the comprehensive plan that we could use to facilitate the engagement that you want to do in a different way with the community, this might be a good forum to try some of those out. So, you know, let's explore that too, if you're open to it.
Absolutely. Scott?
Yeah, I pretty much agreed with everything you said, Mikkel, and in the last time around, except that I think the community does want us, and I think, you know, we can be apt and knowledgeable about this, or make ourselves apt and knowledgeable about this. I think the community is asking what a model outside review board and city administration looks like. Now, I know you and I have both spent enough time shopping around on the NACOL set with the budgets of millions of dollars that some cities spend on police review. And I know that the ordinance doesn't implement that at all in its current step. But I hope when we get the time during these conversations, because that's an undertow that I feel in a lot of the comments that I've been getting. Why aren't you guys more independent? Why isn't the system more transparent? You know, I did a critical incident review board webinar yesterday, and very well presented. Any of you guys that want to do the NACOL webinars, you know, I gave them $10, and a PhD from University of Pennsylvania was on there, and the deputy chief of the Tucson, Arizona police department. And some of their meetings in these critical incident review boards contained 3 lawyers and as many as 2 handfuls of other stakeholders. A massive outlay of capital to create that kind of independent system. But I think we should let ourselves talk about that. I think we're going to have to stay linked to the city unless we want to suggest a referendum or something like that, and a bond to do this, or however you raise money in the city. But I think that's the spirit that I hear in a lot of this comment is, why aren't you guys more independent? Why can't you guys do what you want to do? And so I want to make sure that when we get to category 3, we kind of can go there. So.
Yeah, Scott, thank you. First of all, you've mentioned the NACOL organization. This is the governing body, National Association of Civilian Oversight. And I invite anybody who's interested in learning more about civilian oversight nationally, go to nacole.org. And there are just lots and lots and lots of resources that are available, and as well as all sorts of webinars that people can join if they want to learn more. There are essentially 3 primary CPRB models. I mean, there are all sorts of variations in those models. And one of those models is a body that has investigative and subpoena powers, which the Urbana CPRB does not have, and I think would not be able to have, because that to conduct independent investigations requires all sorts of training and experience in doing those investigations that none of us have, and not to mention a time commitment to engage in that process that I think is beyond because those complaints and investigations add up, beyond the time resources that a volunteer body can really expend. And so the places that have those kinds of CPRBs are generally boards that are part of very large cities like Los Angeles that have a professional paid CPRB. And I think we have to be more creative in figuring out how to create the kind of independent civilian oversight that we want without, the kind of budget that those cities have. Are we ready to move on to item E? I think we are.
Yes.
Yeah. Set up an ongoing CPRB subcommittee to review all police complaint investigations, whether they are appealed or not. So Scott provided us with a little history. Maybe I'll invite you to, yeah, Scott, do you want to say something more about kind of the history of the CPRB, because you date back a lot further with it than I do, and then I'll try to kind of take us into the current day and what, and kind of expand what we've been doing.
Yeah, well, sure. Thanks, Mikkel. Back in the day, in a locked file cabinet on the second floor of the city building were files that had numbers on them, like 2012-01. And they would fill up, and we were all tasked to review those prior to our quarterly meetings. And so when staff represented us, this matrix that I keep on referring to, in which Ricardo and I are going to sort of create at least a portion of it when we do this work, we could look at randomized officer IDs. So in other words, if you had 5 complaints and all of them were resolved successfully, but maybe officer number 5, was in every one of them. Well, that's a trend. That's a pattern that you can look at in the data. And those files continued to grow as evidence was delivered by the police. The chief rendered his decision. If an appeal was made, then all the appeals information went in there. And so we kind of kept current with those. And that's the system that, thanks to HRO staff now, we're kind of facsimiling in the portal that we have. But I and other commissioners felt it was our responsibility to review 100% of those complaints, whether they were appealed or not. And that's my suggestion to all of us now, because you will find that you'll get very used to kind of processing these, and you will learn a lot as you kind of see what happens through the process of that complaint. The tenor of the chief's letter, things that we haven't talked about today, and this may be a component of our spreadsheet, Ricardo, is what kind of administrative action resulted from the complaint. There's maybe an illusion that nothing ever happens if you fill out a complaint form. But in fact, on several of those final chief letters, there were notes like, and I'm making these up, these are close, remanded to counseling for an officer, or retraining, or some other categorization, so that the complainant was actually notified. Yes, on point number 2 of your complaint, we talked to this guy, we brought the officer in, we did whatever we had to do. And so that kind of review, I guess I'm not really in favor of a subcommittee reviewing all the complaints right now, because I think we should all be reviewing all the complaints, at least until we kind of get our feet underneath us in this new motif here. But those were the good old days. It was all hard copy, an administrative staff, gatekeep. We could not take pictures. I was allowed to take notes, so I could bring a legal pad and a pen in, but otherwise everything went back to the gatekeeper on the second floor. and we all felt that it was our responsibility to review those. Very similar to the taser display stuff. For those of you that have been on the board, you know, for at least a year or two, those packets were similar to what we had available to us. So I guess, is that good enough? Yeah, that's good enough.
Yeah, thank you. So it's easier now because we have an electronic portal that we can access, password protected, so we can review the materials from our home. Yeah, I invite other comment from the commission members. Well, I guess I'll. So I think the idea is that the subcommission review the complaint, and if they see something that raises flags for them, then I think they would have the ability to trigger, you know, what would be the equivalent of an appeal. I think is what I'm currently imagining. And so that would involve the entire board and if necessary, you know, whatever other legal infrastructure needs to exist for that.
So I'm with you. I mean, we're looking at each other, and we're going to be in agreement with that amount, from historical to what is it that we want to do. So I just want to verbalize that because I don't think we disagree very far from where we want to be and how transparent we want to be. So.
And my understanding of both the city ordinance and the contract with the Fraternal Order of Police, which I have reviewed to the degree that I'm able, is that we have the ability to do this. The only thing in the contract with FOP that I think we need to be aware of is that it stipulates that that before the CPRB engages in any review process, that the department has concluded its investigation. So I think that would be fine. And as soon as it's concluded, then we can start to review the materials and make recommendations for you know, for a review of the whole if necessary. Carol, is that consistent with your understanding of what's happening?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm reading the board as saying, yes, we want to do this. There are no concerns. There's no opposition. I did hear Scott say, but I think it was before my introduction, that he'd like to see all of us engage in that process. I think the reason to keep it small possibly is, again, so that we can do it so that we can do it consistent with the Open Meetings Act. And once we add a 7th member, that means we can have a subcommittee of 3. And then when that subcommittee flags something that requires the attention of the entire CPRB, then we meet as a body to review it.
I just want to make sure that you understand that I believe, and I'm noticing in your training we don't have Open Meetings Act training that we need to add. That I don't think that we
do.
You do? Well, not in the one that I have to share with you. But I don't think that the number of people that can meet without being in an open meeting changes when you get your 7th person.
It does, because it has to do with the amount of it's 3/4 of quorum. So quorum becomes 4 with a group of 7, and 3/4 of 4 becomes 3.
Okay, but
You're muted, Carol.
You're muted.
Thank you. My computer told me that too. I just want to double check because I don't want there to be any missteps, but you are probably right. But thank you.
Yeah, we will, of course.
Okay,
We'll-
yeah,
we'll be compliant.
just showing me where it says that. So I learned something here today too.
Okay, so what I've said is accurate.
To summarize the original point, then, what we're saying is that we agree that there should be a group of us reviewing all complaints as they come. I mean, it's the same action that Scott and I are taking for the last 2 years, except moving forward, because the portal has given us access. I don't remember when we switched the portal, but I think it was during Alex's time. And what we had to do by going to the office is duplicated by having a robust portal, correct?
Yeah, we don't need to go to the office.
As long as we're confident we have what we need in the portal, and that's one of the functions of the audit that we're going to do.
Yes, correct.
Good. We'll make that list.
Okay, so I think we have a consensus on that point as well. Okay, we have.
Can I make a motion that well, hold on, we can't have any motions. I was going to say that we're getting tired, and I think F is beyond not only the scope of this meeting, but involves some of the community elements that we've been discussing a lot here, to the extent that I would like to just later it.
Yeah, my purpose, there was no way that we were going to go through a thorough and comprehensive review of the amendments that the ordinance might need. My purpose here was, and the reason that it's such a, that the item lacks specificity, is for us to just begin to identify parts of the ordinance that we want to have a deeper discussion about, without saying that there is not an opportunity to discuss other aspects of the ordinance later, just for us to kind of start to identify what we need to do there. That was my thinking. So maybe we can do that a little bit, just, put some items down, and then, we will definitely create space for more dialogue with the public. Is that okay? Does that sound okay, folks?
Sure. I mean,
Yes. Yes.
So for me, the first one then is to take the community proposal and see which parts apply to an ordinance change.
Okay. So I will work with Carol, since she wanted reasonably to have a role in kind of creating our agenda. I'll work with Carol to divide those recommendations into the multiple categories, and we will send, one of us will send the board, like some kind of plan that includes those items.
Yeah, or we can, to make it simpler, just make sure you start picking out which ones fit F.
Yeah. The agenda was made prior to us receiving the petition. So I thank the authors of the petition for doing a little bit of our work. We are certainly doing work in addition to that, but that does make it easier for us, and we do have input from other people. So in the prior to the next meeting, Carol and I will create some kind of plan based on all that input and share it with the board.
The only specific item that I can think of right now, and I drove from Southern Arkansas home to be here in time for this, so I'm fading. We've never been able to get traction on outreach. And we've talked about it, I've submitted an outreach plan identifying stakeholders that I kind of modified from the Portland, Oregon plan that was pretty much DOA. And I think one of the reasons, or at least the reason that I can say politely, publicly, is that the ordinance does not specify activity. We had a couple of things that were deliverables, but if we can think about the ordinance as forcing us into deliverables for outreach, then I would really appreciate that. Meetings with the Ministerial Alliance, the Peace and Justice people. You know, we sort of dove into that very early on in the course of this board, but we just haven't been able to do any of that. And frankly, I haven't been able to get board members really excited about it. So, you know, whatever we can do to help us, I think would be real good. It's all part of the spirit of trying to build this transparency and be a little bit more active in the community that I'd like to see us do. And the partners are there. We are blessed in this community not to have a problem with there being potential partners to talk about procedure, to talk about philosophy, to talk about action.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that as something for us to focus on and gather more public input on. And until we do that, I want to say that I'm available to meet with anybody that's interested in our work. And I imagine that a lot of the commission members are similarly available. So reach out to us and we will work with you to create whatever makes sense. Okay, I think we have a plan for F. Are there any announcements? Carol.
I have an announcement that there is a vacancy on the CPRB and the mayor would like to receive applications. So just want to put that out there for folks and they can get in touch with the mayor's office. And if they're interested and they want to, if they want to just submit their level of interest, that would be fine. Or I'm sure the chair would be happy to talk to people if they want to understand more about what's involved in participating, or I would be happy to, or Vasilia would, I'm sure. So, you know, get in touch with any of us. And then I would also just to say, by way of making sure people are aware of it, but also to respond to Mr. Dossett's last point, which is we are also recruiting for a community engagement coordinator right now. And so anybody who is interested in that, that is a full-time position with the city. But that individual will be a good resource for you all to kind of join together with and engage with, engage in with the community together. And, you know, work collaboratively to create opportunities for reaching out. So 2 opportunities. If you want to volunteer to be on the CPRB, we'd love to hear from you. And if you have an interest in being the community engagement coordinator, we'd love to have you apply. Thank you.
Other announcements?
I had a quick note. The National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement is going to a full virtual annual meeting this year. And there will be 32 sessions, or you can sign up for them individually. The title of this year's conference is Oversight in Uncertain Times, The Path Ahead. As we've talked about before, NACO's about 25 years old and it's got some real good brains working in it. And you can just go to info@naco.org to find out all you want to know about the conference.
And I want to endorse all of that. I've been to two such conferences, and they're really informative. And it's nice to connect with people that have been doing this sort of thing in other places, in some cases for much longer than we have. I was shocked to learn that Milwaukee had a CPRB that's over 100 years old. I was speechless for I don't know how long when I heard that. So yeah, it's a good learning opportunity. Thank you.
One more. Can I have one more? On a more local level, there's a webinar series that's beginning July the 5th under the title of Democratize This, We Make the World We Want. And that's been advertised a little bit on Facebook. That's kind of a pay, I don't understand exactly the sliding scale thing, but if you want to go to democratizethis.net, you can find out about that. And they're digging into racism, the pandemic, empowerment, roots and causes of problems and stuff like that. So this is kind of a local genesis here. And again, it's just democratizethis.net for registration.
Yeah, thank you. All right, any other announcements? All right, well, we're not taking motions, but I think we are allowed to take a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
Second.
I guess we need a roll call, do we?
I can call in. Ricardo Diaz,
Big yay for me.
Scott Dossett,
Yes.
Mikhail Levinsky,
Yes.
Megan McGinty,
Yes.
Patrice Pelmore,
Do I still abstain because I haven't had orientation, or I'm going to abstain?
okay, thank you. Daryl Price.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Okay. Good night, everyone.